En témoignent les récentes rencontres en juin dernier à Paris, puis en juillet à Kiev, entre le président du Sénat, Gérard Larcher, et le président de la Rada, Ruslan Stefanchuk. Outre leur volonté de faire avancer le statut de l'Ukraine auprès de l'Union européenne, les présidents des deux assemblées ont exprimé leur souhait de poursuivre la coopération interparlementaire, mais aussi d'encourager les relations entre collectivités territoriales françaises et ukrainiennes. La coopération décentralisée constitue en effet un axe fort de notre relation bilatérale. En tant que présidente du groupe d'amitié France-Ukraine, j'œuvre également avec les sénateurs membres du groupe d'amitié, une cinquantaine à ce jour, et c'est le groupe d'amitié le plus important du Sénat, pour enrichir, plus important en nombre, pour enrichir et consolider ces liens à tous les niveaux, en organisant notamment des rencontres régulières avec nos homologues ukrainiens, et nous recevons très régulièrement et très fréquemment des délégations qui nous arrivent d'Ukraine. J'attache beaucoup d'importance au développement de nos relations personnelles afin que notre amitié interparlementaire soit véritablement incarnée. Je crois pouvoir affirmer aujourd'hui qu'elle repose sur une profonde solidarité enracinée dans une amitié entre les parlementaires de nos deux assemblées. Je viens de l'évoquer à l'instant, le Sénat, en tant qu'assemblée parlementaire représentant les collectivités territoriales, s'est engagé avec conviction dans le développement de la coopération décentralisée. Les relations entre collectivités locales me tiennent particulièrement à cœur, car elles permettent de créer des liens au cœur de nos territoires et de tisser de façon très concrète un réseau de solidarité sur lequel les Ukrainiens peuvent s'appuyer et auquel les communes françaises aujourd'hui aspirent. C'est dans cet esprit qu'à l'occasion du Congrès des maires de France, que les sénateurs se sont proposés pour accueillir au Sénat les maires ukrainiens d'une dizaine de localités qui feront le déplacement à l'invitation de l'Association des maires de France afin d'initier de nouveaux échanges et, je l'espère, d'éventuels partenariats ou jumelages. Comme vous le voyez, notre groupe d'amitié et notre Haute Assemblée sont très mobilisés au service de la relation avec l'Ukraine. Sur les questions qui vont être abordées cet après-midi, nous savons que la France et l'Europe sont attendues. Sur le terrain militaire d'abord, l'aide matérielle et financière est cruciale et ne doit pas, ne peut pas faiblir. Nos homologues ukrainiens nous le disent et je les soutiens et je continuerai sans relâche de les soutenir. Ce sera l'objet de la première table ronde. Nous devrons également être des partenaires dans la reconstruction. De très nombreuses infrastructures essentielles ont été détruites par les frappes russes et sont détruites chaque jour dans plusieurs secteurs, à commencer par celui de l'énergie, sujet qui sera abordé lors de la deuxième table ronde. Enfin, sur la question de l'identité européenne de l'Ukraine, sujet de la troisième table ronde, l'ouverture des négociations pour l'adhésion à l'Union européenne est une étape indispensable, bien sûr, mais elle doit être abordée plus largement avec une réflexion de fond. J'ai en effet la conviction que notre avenir commun passe avant tout par la défense de valeurs partagées et essentielles. On ne peut pas laisser triompher ceux qui agressent, ceux qui ne respectent pas la souveraineté des États. Les règles du droit international et les droits humains ne sont pas négociables. Avant de laisser la parole aux modérateurs et experts des trois tables rondes qui promettent d'être passionnantes, permettez-moi de remercier encore une fois toutes les personnes qui ont contribué à l'organisation de cet événement, les équipes d'Eastern Circles, du magazine Diplomatie, d'Open Society Foundations, d'Eurasian Initiative for Peace and Development, et je salue également mon collègue vice-président du Sénat, M. Rachard, et des services du Sénat. Je vous souhaite à tous une bonne conférence et de fructueux travaux, et je vous remercie, et un merci tout particulier aussi à Amélie Mérège qui se cache, mais qui a fait un travail formidable pour l'organisation de cette journée. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Sollogoub. Merci à tous d'être venus. Je suis Anastasia Chapechkina, présidente du think tank français Eastern Circles, qui agit surtout sur les enjeux énergétiques et de sécurité dans les régions de l'Europe de l'Est, et avec la concentration spéciale sur l'Ukraine. Aujourd'hui, je suis là juste pour vous éclairer sur quelques points organisationnels et ensuite, on lance tout de suite dans les discussions passionnantes que vous attendez depuis tout à l'heure. Et là, d'abord, le premier point organisationnel, c'est la traduction. Si vous n'avez pas encore trouvé, ici en salle, vous pouvez utiliser la casque pour tous les speakers qui parlent en anglais ou en ukrainien. Et là, il y a 3 canaux. Si vous voulez la traduction en français, vous choisissez le canal numéro 1. Pour la traduction en anglais, le canal numéro 2. Pour la traduction en ukrainien, vous choisissez le canal numéro 3. S'il vous plaît, comme ça, vous savez qu'est-ce que vous préférez. Je voudrais vous aussi mentionner que toute cette conférence elle est basée sur le travail qu'on a fait avec la Diplomatie, sur l'initiative de Diplomatie, de faire un numéro spécial sur l'Ukraine. Et là, on a fait un partenariat avec Eastern Circles, la préparation de tout ce numéro avec les experts illustres ukrainiens et français, notamment sur les sujets de la défense, de l'énergie, de l'identité nationale et des partenariats. Aujourd'hui, vous aurez même accès à ce numéro physique qui se trouve, comme vous le savez, la Diplomatie, c'est un beau journal. Il va se retrouver au niveau des cafés pendant la pause café. Vous pouvez prendre, s'il vous plaît, prenez un numéro par personne. Et ensuite, le tout dernier point sur le format. Très important, surtout pour nos intervenants, mais aussi pour l'audience, comme ça, vous comprenez ce qui se passe. Notre format de la conférence va se passer dans le style de l'interview, c'est-à-dire que le modérateur, après son petit mot d'introduction et l'annonce des biographies des intervenants, va tout de suite passer aux questions. Il va poser une question et chaque intervenant aura 3 minutes. Merci les intervenants de comprendre ça, 3 minutes, pas 4, pas 3 et demi. Et comment on sait que c'est 3 minutes et pas 3 minutes et demie, demanderez-vous. Et là, on a notre ami Nathan. Nathan, il est assis vraiment au milieu du premier rang. Comme ça, il est vraiment très visible par tous les intervenants. Nathan aura 2 morceaux de papier. Et là, pour les amateurs de foot, vous savez déjà ce que ça va dire. À 2 minutes 30, Nathan est notre timekeeper, bien sûr. Il va discrètement montrer le papier jaune. Comme ça, c'est que les intervenants qui le voient. Mais à 3 minutes, Nathan lève devant sa tête le papier rouge. Le papier jaune signifie pour chaque intervenant que c'est l'heure de conclure. Et s'il n'a pas réussi de le faire dans les 30 secondes suivantes, mais c'est l'heure maintenant pour le modérateur, surtout, de nous amener vers la question suivante. Et là, l'intervenant doit savoir qu'il va être amené à conclure par le modérateur. Et c'est tout ce que je voulais dire. Avec ça, je passe la parole à premier panel qui va être introduit par notre premier modérateur, le rédacteur en chef adjoint du journal Diplomatie, Thomas Delage. Thomas.
Vous m'entendez? C'est bon. Donc, bonjour à tous et merci aux organisateurs. Comme vous l'avez compris, on n'a pas trop de temps à perdre. Donc, je vais tout de suite commencer cette première table ronde qui s'intitule « La stratégie militaire de l'Ukraine ». Le 24 février dernier, la Russie déclenchait, sur ordre de Vladimir Poutine, le retour de la guerre en Europe. Si la guerre se voulait brève côté russe, à l'image de l'invasion de la Crimée en 2014, le plan initial du Kremlin, basé sur une supériorité militaire totale, ne s'est visiblement pas déroulé comme prévu. Face à la résistance inattendue de Kiev, qui n'est pas tombée, et en raison d'une stratégie pour le moins défaillante du côté de Moscou, l'Ukraine résiste depuis le début de l'invasion russe. La semaine dernière, l'armée ukrainienne a libéré la ville de Kherson, qui était tombée dès le début du conflit et qui a par la suite été annexée par la Russie, à l'image d'autres provinces ukrainiennes. La Russie vient ainsi de perdre la seule capitale régionale qui avait été conquise par les troupes russes. Alors que la Russie a lancé une mobilisation partielle et qu'elle semble acheter des drones et des munitions à l'Iran et à la Corée du Nord, l'Ukraine continue d'avancer en restant prudente et regarde désormais vers le Donbass et la Crimée. Si Moscou poursuit sa stratégie d'intimidation, continuant de faire planer la menace nucléaire et visant les infrastructures énergétiques du pays, quelle est aujourd'hui la stratégie de l'Ukraine face à la Russie? Pour parler de ce sujet, nous avons la chance d'avoir avec nous, en direct depuis Kiev, Volodymyr Datsenko, qui va apparaître par là, normalement, je pense. Ok. Ok, très bien. Bon. Eh ben, on va poser des questions à quelqu'un d'autre. Alors, donc je le présente quand même, au cas où il se joindrait à nous, Vladimir Datsenko, qui est expert militaire chez NACO, une ONG ukrainienne indépendante œuvrant pour les réformes de la défense de l'Ukraine et ancien conseiller du ministre ukrainien de l'économie pour la réforme du système d'achat dans le secteur militaire. Nous avons aussi ici avec nous Olena Tregoub, qui est du comité indépendant de la lutte contre la corruption dans le secteur de la défense, NACO, à Kiev. Nous avons aussi Anna Shelest, ici, qui est responsable du programme de sécurité de Ukrainian Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, et rédactrice en chef de Ukraine Analytica. Nous avons le général de corps d'armée Michel Yakovlev, ancien représentant du commandant suprême des forces alliées en Europe au comité militaire de l'OTAN et ancien membre du comité de supervision de NACO à Paris. Et enfin, nous avons Florian Parmentier, qui est secrétaire général du CEVIPOF, le Centre de recherche politique de Sciences Po Paris. Donc, nous allons commencer les questions. Alors, la première était pour Volodymyr Datsenko, qui n'est pas là. Donc, on va s'adapter. Je vais quand même poser la question peut-être au général Michel Yakovlev, puisque c'était une question plutôt stratégique. Quels ont été les principaux ingrédients du succès de la résistance ukrainienne face à l'invasion russe? C'est traduit dans
Ok, donc les principaux ingrédients du succès ukrainien, j'en vois trois. Le premier, c'est déjà la qualité de la résistance ukrainienne en tant que telle, le moral des troupes, le fait que l'armée était quand même, elle s'est préparée au choc dans les derniers jours. Il semblerait qu'ils se soient redéployés en partie, ils ont mobilisé des moyens. Voilà. Donc, en gros, le choc a été une surprise, mais il y a eu des mesures palliatives. Et puis après, ça a déroulé. La deuxième raison, c'est le renseignement, obtenu en grande partie des Américains, aussi avec les Britanniques et d'autres. Mais clairement, les Ukrainiens, dès le début, ont été beaucoup mieux renseignés sur les Russes que l'inverse. À l'heure actuelle, je pense que les Ukrainiens génèrent la plupart de leurs renseignements. En réalité, maintenant, ils sont au contact. Mais au début, je pense, ça, je ne le sais pas, hein, je n'ai pas eu d'informations particulières. Je pense qu'ils ont beaucoup dépendu du renseignement allié, notamment sur la profondeur. Et puis le troisième facteur, et c'est peut-être le plus important, c'est l'incompétence russe qui a surpris, vraiment honnêtement surpris, moi, tous mes camarades, qui serait un motif de rire et d'ironie si la situation n'était pas si tragique. Mais bon, les exemples abondent. Voilà. Alors, les Russes vont peut-être améliorer leur performance au fil du temps. Ça commence à se voir un peu, mais moins vite que les Ukrainiens. Donc, dans la course à la performance, pour l'instant, l'avantage est plutôt aux Ukrainiens.
Très bien. Juste une remarque, puisque dans l'article de Volodymyr Datsenko, il disait que la plus grande force de l'Ukraine, c'était sa population. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Oui, j'avais commencé par ça, mais là j'enfonce un peu des portes ouvertes. Enfin, au sens là, c'est un peuple en armes, une nation en armes, dans le concept le plus ontologique du terme. J'espère que ça fera réfléchir l'Europe d'une façon générale, hein, les membres de l'Union européenne. Ça me fait penser à cette phrase des Suisses. En Suisse, ils disent « Tout pays a une armée, la sienne ou celle d'un autre ». Je pense qu'on a intérêt à méditer cette phrase. Les Russes n'ont pas compris que face à eux, ils avaient une armée.
Très bien, merci. Ensuite, j'avais une question pour Anna Shelest. Alors que l'Ukraine vient de libérer la ville de Kherson, que le président Zelensky a visité ce matin même, quelle est désormais la stratégie de l'armée ukrainienne pour repousser l'armée russe encore plus loin?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Definitely, that is a good question. What is the strategy for the next? We already see several elements of it. Element number one is that nobody is going to stop. So winter is coming, but winter doesn't mean the freezing of the conflict. At least the Ukrainian perspective is so, because a lot of international experts are saying that probably winter it will be more difficult. Yes, definitely. That's why Ukraine requested for the warm clothes, for the special equipment. But at the same time, first of all, we are not coming from Sudan to Ukraine. So our army knows what it means to work in the winter conditions. The second, we're speaking about quite a technological military warfare that is happening, plus mechanized. And for them, when it is winter, it can be especially on the south, better than autumn, because autumn, rain, mud, and all these difficult conditions. But winter, it's drier and a little bit easier for the advancement in case they have sufficient supply. That's for sure. Plus, a lot of the actions that are happening, that is the long-range artillery. They don't care. Is it cold or not? It is about completely different issues. So first is definitely continuation of liberation as much as we can, as far as we can, considering conditions on the ground. The second is continuing working with the international community regarding the supply. The next Rammstein meeting should be this week, if I'm not mistaken. So let's see what will be the announcement from there. That is continuous work on Russian sanctions, because unfortunately there are more and more countries that would like to bypass the sanctions, even that they introduced. And that is the huge work that we are doing both at the level of the civil society and at the level of the government. That is the joint work to find all the loopholes about these. Olena will tell much better how it is done. But the work with the sanctions list, with increased sanctions, extremely important. It's not to sophisticate the society or something like this, but when you see how many of the Russian military enterprises, for example, in the list for sanctions, that's really quite an interesting. You will find a lot of interesting information for you. Or how many of the foreign details you still can find in the Russian ammunition. That's also raised the questions with our sanctions. So that is the block number 2. Number 3, it is the strategy for justice. That is the work that's already started about tribunal, about war crimes investigations, both on the ground and on the international level, because you can liberate the territories, but people also request for justice. And you saw Bucha, Irpin, you saw Izum, you saw all those mass graves. Now we just few days we liberated Kherson. We already know about the additional mass graves happening there.
Je vous remercie pour le respect du temps. J'avais une autre question, je reviens vers vous déjà, Monsieur Yakovlev, désolé. Certains observateurs annonçaient que le conflit allait se figer avec l'arrivée de l'hiver, comme on vient de le voir. Pour d'autres, la Russie a déjà perdu la guerre, mais elle ne le sait pas encore ou elle ne l'accepte pas. Où en est concrètement le conflit aujourd'hui et quelles sont les perspectives pour l'Ukraine d'un point de vue stratégique et militaire?
Je pense que nous allons vers une pause opérationnelle, comme on dit. Elle n'est pas liée à l'hiver, pour les raisons que vous avez expliquées, même s'il y a des interruptions dues à des pluies importantes. Elle est plus liée, je crois, à l'épuisement des armées et en particulier de leur stock de munitions. Je n'ai aucun renseignement pour dire ça, et si ça se trouve, les Ukrainiens sont assis sur un stock fantastique. En réalité, j'en doute, et je pense que c'est vrai des deux camps. Donc la pause qu'on va avoir, je crois, est une pause organisationnelle, essentiellement pour, après 8 mois, réorganiser les forces, remonter la maintenance des matériels et économiser un peu les munitions, je crois. Maintenant, on n'est pas à l'abri d'une surprise. Il n'y a qu'un camp dans l'état actuel des choses qui peut causer la surprise, c'est les Ukrainiens. Les Russes, à l'heure actuelle, sont contraints à la passivité, en gros, pour l'instant. Ils n'ont pas de masse de manœuvre, alors qu'il n'est pas exclu que les Ukrainiens, il leur reste une masse de manœuvre. Donc, si quelqu'un crée une nouvelle surprise, un nouveau choc, pour moi, dans les mois à venir, ce sont les Ukrainiens. Mais le plus probable, je crois, pour moi, est une pause opérationnelle. Et je répète, pas liée à l'hiver, liée à, après 8 mois, il faut que ça se calme. Voilà. Et je ne sais pas s'il y avait une autre question, mais...
Non, c'était où en était le conflit et quelles sont les perspectives d'un point de vue stratégique et militaire. Ça a globalement répondu. Ça évite le carton jaune. Je me tourne maintenant vers vous, Florent Parmentier. En septembre dernier, un groupe d'experts coprésidé par l'ancien secrétaire général de l'OTAN s'est réuni afin de préparer un projet de pacte de sécurité pour garantir que l'Ukraine ne soit plus jamais envahie. Quelles sont les perspectives de fin de conflit? Est-ce que des négociations de paix sont envisageables à court ou moyen terme?
Merci. Je pense qu'il faut rappeler d'abord que la paix est un objectif désirable, mais elle ne peut pas être désirable à n'importe quel prix. C'est ce qui fait la différence entre un pacifiste et un homme de paix. Et en l'occurrence, si on signe une paix qui n'est qu'un armistice, je pense qu'on y est perdant. Si on signe une paix dans laquelle le principe qui règne est de l'impunité, c'est-à-dire la capacité pour celui qui a frappé de revenir, c'est également problématique. Donc, va se poser effectivement la question de savoir quelles sont les conditions à partir desquelles on peut négocier quelque chose qui soit durable, c'est-à-dire accepté d'une manière ou d'une autre par l'ensemble des parties prenantes. Une fois qu'on a ça, il faut observer qu'on a eu plusieurs tentatives de plan de paix. En réalité, Minsk 2, c'était une tentative qui a échoué. On peut penser que Recep Tayyip Erdogan a ses propres perspectives sur la paix et pour ça, il s'appuie à la fois sur finalement sa présence, sa capacité d'État membre de l'OTAN et puis également d'État qui peut à la fois discuter et avec la partie ukrainienne et avec la partie russe. C'est un deuxième élément. S'il fallait regarder les plans de paix qu'on a vus ces derniers mois, on a pu avoir des personnalités diverses comme Mario Draghi ou comme Elon Musk qui ont proposé leur plan de paix. Chacun de ces plans de paix souffrant d'un certain nombre j'allais dire, de faiblesses qui font qu'ils n'étaient pas admissibles en l'état. Et en réalité, l'une des raisons pour lesquelles les plans de paix à court terme sont probablement hors de portée, c'est lié à un phénomène précis qui est que tant que l'une des deux parties a l'impression de pouvoir prendre le dessus sur l'autre dans le conflit actuel, eh bien, on sera bien en peine d'attendre, j'allais dire, de chaque côté. On ne verrait pas très bien ce qui pousserait l'un et l'autre acteur à aller dans cette direction-là, au moins pour les prochains mois. Mais naturellement, si je suis trompé, si je suis dans l'erreur et s'il y a une paix qui est signée ce soir, je serai le premier content de m'être trompé. Mais disons que la perspective est plutôt celle-ci. Se pose, c'est le dernier point, effectivement, je regarde fiévreusement pour savoir quand le carton jaune va arriver, mais se pose le dernier point qui est le plus important, qui à partir du moment où on est dans cette situation-là, qu'on ne veut pas d'armistice momentané, mais qu'on sait que toute possibilité, effectivement, est fragile, se pose la question de savoir quel sera le moment opportun. Et c'est à ce titre que beaucoup de critiques ont pu être faites contre Emmanuel Macron ces derniers mois en ce qui concerne ses initiatives et ses discussions, mais il faut bien reconnaître que chez les Grecs, il y a 3 dieux du temps. Il y a Chronos, qui est le temps du dieu qui passe. Il y a Aion, qui est le temps de la cyclicité. Bon. Et puis, il y a Kairos, qui est le dieu du moment opportun. Et se posera la question de savoir qui aura ce moment opportun. Et donc, c'est ce dont on va pouvoir discuter dès maintenant.
C'était le moment opportun de s'arrêter. On va maintenant aborder la question des réformes dans le secteur de la défense de l'Ukraine, notamment avec vous, Olena Tregoub. NACO travaille depuis des années sur les réformes de la défense en Ukraine. Pouvez-vous nous donner un exemple de votre réforme de défense la plus importante qui a eu le plus grand impact sur le cours de la guerre?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to firstly say that we, like in Ukraine, we believe that the only lasting peace scenario is possible in case of big Ukrainian victory. If Ukraine wins big, Ukraine takes back Crimea, Ukraine punishes Russia for this aggression, it will deter Russia from trying to invade Ukraine in the nearest future. Otherwise, indeed, we saw what happened in 2014 when peace was achieved by basically surrendering our territories. It only encouraged Russia to go for more. And at NACO, of course, we analyzed what happened since 2014 in defense sector. And Ukraine started to build up its military. And the biggest reform, I think that Ukraine definitely decided that they are going towards Euro-Atlantic direction, and principles of a NATO-styled command-driven mission command was adopted. It's when lower ranking officers and sergeants, they were giving power to decide on the ground when they don't have to ask for permission of their higher authorities to decide on certain missions. And it really helped Ukraine now to repel Russian aggression, because Ukraine is able to be sort of doing multi-directional operations on the front line. The front line, as you know, is huge. And in Russia, unlike in Ukraine, they don't have this mission-driven command principle. They always require authorization from the top of the military. And because of that, they are less capable of this multi-directional warfare. And it's a very big success of Ukraine. Ukrainians are naturally, I would say, more like NATO-styled warriors, because Ukrainian Cossacks, they were always very good defenders. They were always democratic, in a sense that they were deciding for themselves about how they are going to fight, what is the best decision. We never had authoritarian kind of leadership style. And this reform was successful. Then we had some transparency, anti-corruption reforms. We make defense procurement more transparent. And overall, I must tell you that Ukrainian defense sector before the full-scale invasion was very open to like civil society. Michel Yakovlev was also involved in anti-corruption reforms in defense sector in Ukraine. In Russia, there was nothing like that, and we see the results right now.
Je vous remercie. Justement, à propos de la corruption, c'est toujours une question pour vous. La défaite militaire russe en Ukraine a été attribuée au niveau élevé de corruption dans l'armée. Comment caractérisez-vous les niveaux de corruption dans le secteur de la défense ukrainienne et comment cette situation a-t-elle évolué depuis le début de la guerre?
Well, as you maybe heard in international media, some stories are emerging which are spreading Russian narrative about Ukraine being like a corrupt, failed state, and therefore the West shouldn't help Ukraine. It is absolutely false narrative, because essentially Ukraine has proven if Ukraine was so corrupt, and if Ukrainian defense and security sector was so corrupt, Ukraine would have been invaded by Russia right now. It's very clear. So we see right now during full-scale invasion, we don't have a single big scandal that would involve, for example, Western military assistance, not a single scandal. Yes, there are corruption cases of like humanitarian assistance, some little like non-lethal supplies, which are being investigated. And I want to stress that during full-scale invasion right now, the Ukrainian independent anti-corruption infrastructure, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Agency for Corruption Prevention, High Anti-Corruption Court, they are all functioning. And they are now sentencing people to jail for not so serious corruption, but the whole Ukrainian state is not fragile. It's a super resilient state. It's very digital and it is functioning. And I think that therefore, right now, of course, in every conflict, in every war, corruption grows. It's an axiom for any country around the world. But in Ukraine right now, it's being mitigated also by the fact that people are fighting for their country, for their freedom, for their life. It's existential war. And of course, there is very low tolerance to corruption right now, even among, military people, and it really helps.
Je vous remercie. Apparemment, si j'ai bien compris, Volodymyr Datsenko nous a rejoints. Du coup, bonjour à vous. J'avais une question pour vous. Les armes de l'Occident arrivent de différents pays et différents systèmes. Comment l'Ukraine fait-elle face à ce cauchemar logistique? Quels sont ses principaux défis liés à la diversité des systèmes militaires et comment cette cacophonie a pu impacter la capacité de l'Ukraine à se défendre?
Добрий день, сподіваюсь, мене чути. Справа в тому, що ця війна показала, що дуже важливо швидко адаптуватися до нових умов, які змінюються постійно на фронті. І тому, якби Україна, вона вела свою оборону, виходячи з стратегії меншої сторони, виходячи з того, щоб використовувати більш розгалуджені логістичні маршрути, більш приховані, більш таємні від ворога. Це кардинально відрізняється від того, що використовує Російська Федерація, яка все ж таки ґрунтується в першу чергу на залізничних маршрутах, на важкому сполученні, яка дуже сильно залежить від цього важкого сполучення і логістики. Тому якби українська стратегія більш маневрена, вона більш адаптаційна, і якби це саме те, що допомагає Україні в цій нерівній боротьбі не просто стояти і супротивлятися ворогу, але й перемагати його.
Je vous remercie. Je reviens vers vous, Olena Tregoub. Aujourd'hui, l'Ukraine dépend des approvisionnements étrangers pour ses armes. Toutefois, il ne s'agit pas d'une stratégie durable à long terme. Quels sont les produits issus du développement conjoint d'armes entre l'Ukraine et les partenaires occidentaux? Quels sont les principaux partenaires de l'Ukraine en dehors des États-Unis et de l'Europe? Et comment investir sur le territoire ukrainien compte tenu des risques de destruction par la Russie de tout complexe militaro-industriel?
Yes, indeed, the risk right now is high because Russia, from very first days of the full-scale invasion, was targeting Ukrainian defense infrastructure, and we have our military-industrial complex, which has now been damaged severely. But they are still being able to repair a lot of equipment, and they are very much willing to have joint ventures with the Western manufacturers, with those who are now helping us, supplying us with weapons to basically start developing a new military-industrial complex that would be fully integrated into NATO. They are now negotiating, as maybe you have heard, some of you have heard, several days ago, Ukraine signed agreement with the Ministry of Defense of the Czech Republic to create a defense cluster in Czech Republic and start essentially common production, repairs, and Ukrainian companies, they would need to relocate essentially to Eastern Europe, to the Czech Republic, to Poland, and because in Ukraine, only right now in a secure locations such work is possible, because otherwise it's obviously will be immediately a target. But I want to say also that we need a supply of this equipment already right now. We don't have time to wait until Ukraine starts its own manufacturing with the partners. This is a long-term, mid-term perspective, but in a short term right now, there should be no pause absolutely in terms of military assistance. On the contrary, there should be right now increase of military assistance, because it's a very good time right now. It's winter. Ukraine needs to receive winter uniforms. Ukraine needs to receive surface-to-air missiles, more like from France. You have a Crotal system, which is very good. We need to receive ammunition, 155 ammunition, which we now lacking. And we now see that our partners, even United States, they did not launch their production, like their wartime production. They did not do that. They basically, the companies are saying they are not sure whether there will be demand for all that supply. But it's a political matter. It should be done because Russia is doing that, and France has also huge impact here as a country who supplies very good weapons to Ukraine. France should do now to step up and help in this critical moment when Ukraine can win big very soon.
Je vous remercie. Je me tourne maintenant vers vous, Anna Shelest. Quel est aujourd'hui concrètement l'impact de la guerre sur l'Ukraine et quel est l'état du pays et de la population après bientôt 9 mois de conflit?
Definitely, even 3 days of the war have quite a significant impact for the any type of the society, but there are several issues that should be understood. Initial shock passed quite quickly. And the Russian actions, especially of the mass attacks on the critical infrastructure, the main idea was terrorize civilians, to bring fear and to bring a certain opposition to the governmental actions. Let's be honest, the logic of these acts and why we call the Russian attacks against the civilian infrastructure as the terrorist acts, because it is reaching the political goal with the threatening, with the fear, with some military actions. And the idea was that initial support of more than 90% of Ukrainian population of the actions of the government to fight, but not to surrender, somehow to minimize it. The effect is absolutely different. And that is really interesting to follow the social networks and everything. Definitely, we have a significant group of those people who unfortunately became refugees. And there are 2 reasons for this. One, that in some cities like Kharkiv, it's just impossible to live because approximately 70% of the residential buildings are just destroyed. So it is physical, no place where to live. And there are yet some group, it is women with small kids. Probably all of you remember spring pictures, videos from the border. It is tremendously different that the migrant crisis some years ago in Europe, because you have not young men, you have women with very small kids. And that makes this picture why people are living. So women probably even can create the conditions, but kids are extremely afraid of the air raids. And even in Odessa, that I consider is one of the luckiest towns, if you compare even with neighboring Mykolaiv, not speaking without more eastern territories, I can have 3-4 times per day of the air raid. And trust me, when you hear the sound of the air raid accompanied by the church bells, you're becoming trembling, even if you have very good nervous system. And now imagine that you're a 5-10 years old kid, when you can't understand, you can't think normally with this. So that's why I know a lot of women who made these decisions just because of their kids. But at the same time, those who stayed, this famous speech of President Zelensky, without gas or without you, without electricity or without you, that's really what a lot of people are repeating. The attacks against Kyiv, a few weeks ago, some of the roads being reconstructed in 24 hours, just to make it visible that we are deleting, we are canceling you, you will not have effect. People started speaking about buying generators, candles, warm clothes, joking which brand of the hoodies are better or the pajamas are better for the winter, but not speaking about running from the country. So that's why impact on the society is serious, but at the same time, the society is trying to be more resilient. And yet one thing, sense of humor is helping, the feeling that is existential war is helping, and probably understanding that there is no way to run. If we run, we will not have the independence. But yes, post-traumatic syndrome will be societal, not individual.
Je vous remercie. Laurent Parmentier, quelle est la position et la stratégie adoptée par les voisins européens de l'Ukraine sur cette invasion russe? Notamment, on pense à la Pologne ou aux États baltes, alors que ces derniers craignaient déjà de longue date la menace russe.
Merci. Question importante parce que aussi bien la Pologne que les États baltes nous ont prévenus depuis un certain temps ce danger était réel et pas fin. une fois qu'on a dit ça, j'ai presque envie de dire, chacun voit un peu midi à sa porte. Je reprends un exemple récent. Lors de la mort de Mikhaïl Gorbatchev, on s'était posé la question de savoir qui avait mis fin à la guerre froide. Et 10 ans après la fin de la guerre froide, 10 ans après la fin de la guerre froide, il y avait une table ronde qui était organisée dans laquelle on avait la plupart des personnes qui étaient là au moment de la chute du mur. Et on avait Margaret Thatcher qui disait bah, c'est grâce à moi, on a fait s'il fallait avec Ronald Reagan pour lancer une révolution libérale que les soviétiques n'ont pas pu suivre, etc. Puis ensuite, même table ronde, George Bush a dit mais pas du tout, George Bush père, non, en fait c'est nous qui avons une politique qui nous a permis effectivement de mettre fin à la politique de la guerre froide. Puis ensuite Helmut Kohl était sur la même table ronde, mais non, c'est nous les Allemands. La chute du mur de Berlin, c'est avant tout nous Allemands qui avons fait une politique depuis les années 70, etc. Plusieurs personnes, puis à la fin de la table ronde, évidemment, Mikhaïl Gorbatchev disait bah, j'ai aussi un peu ma part de responsabilité. C'est pour dire que peut-être qu'aucune de ces personnes en fait n'avait totalement tort dans leur perception de la réalité. Mais en revanche, ce qui était amusant, c'est que le même événement a été vu de manière extrêmement différente suivant les personnes concernées. Ce qui veut dire que oui, la Pologne et les États baltes ont vu des parties de la réalité qui sonnent justes aujourd'hui, mais il y a 2 ans, on aurait pu avoir la même table ronde, on a dit, mais finalement, Angela Merkel est la personne qui a réussi en Europe à faire tenir différents intérêts, etc. Ce qui nous amène effectivement peut-être à un mot important, et je pense qu'on y reviendra, c'est tout simplement de se dire que il est bon pour les Européens de ne pas jouer les uns contre les autres, de comprendre les craintes de sécurité, qui sont des craintes qui relèvent parfois d'émotions particulières liées à l'histoire, parfois de réalités concrètes. Et donc, on n'y arrivera pas forcément, et certainement pas en montant les Européens les uns contre les autres, c'est arrivé assez souvent, ou en critiquant les institutions européennes. Il faut se souvenir que avant d'être finalement de très bons défenseurs de la cause ukrainienne en Europe, la Pologne elle-même n'a pas toujours été extrêmement fair-play vis-à-vis des institutions européennes. Je parle ici d'état de droit. Et ce sera partie des questions pour demain.
Merci. Je me tourne vers vous maintenant, Général, pour aborder le rôle de l'OTAN dans ce conflit. Pour vous, l'OTAN devrait aller plus loin dans l'aide à apporter à l'Ukraine. Existe-t-il un risque d'escalade et que doit faire concrètement, selon vous, quelle doit être la stratégie de l'OTAN dans ce conflit?
Oui. I'll say that in English because for most of my NATO friends, I prefer them to hear it in English. NATO strategy, to save time, there was no NATO strategy, so I could walk out now, basically. It's a failure. And what happened in 2022 is a failure since 2014, and arguably since Georgia, 2008. Having said that, NATO is the member nations. So there has been a response of some member nations to include quite seriously as from 2017, and that has helped the Ukrainians big way. For example, donations of missiles and so on. Now, NATO is involved today, mostly psychologically, you know, much rounds of applause and demonstration of love and friendship. The cooperation mechanisms of NATO are used, and they are useful. But NATO as an institution, as an organization, in my own views, and I regret saying that of my former organization, it's been a miserable failure, and now it's kind of catch up. But it's also the nations. Now, as we know, in NATO, there was a very vocal group of people, as you said, Raymond, who said, you know, there's going to be more of it after 2014, and another group that advocated what we called strategic patience, let's not start the Third World War basically over Crimea, and time will sort it out. That was un pari, an educated guess that failed, basically. So NATO as a conduit, a coordination agency to a certain degree, is doing its best to help, but ultimately it's a number of nations that are helping Ukraine, and we wouldn't be there if Ukraine hadn't done the job.
Très bien, je vous remercie. Est-ce que Volodymyr Datsenko est toujours avec nous? Oui. Oui, apparemment oui. Du coup, je me tourne vers vous. J'avais une question. Dans quelle mesure l'aide de l'OTAN a-t-il été significatif dans la stratégie militaire de l'Ukraine sur le terrain?
Ну, звісно, що ця допомога, військова допомога, яка отримала Україна від країн НАТО, вона кардинально вплинула на війну. Бо від самого початку, коли ми повернемося в 24 лютого, це була війна з таких радянських технологій, які були озброєні в Україні і Росії. І спочатку були певні там передостороги і сумніви з приводу того, чи допоможуть Україні там, наприклад, системи Стінгер в боротьбі проти Росії. І ми побачили, наскільки сильно змінилося поле бою після того, як з'явилася система Стінгер. І зараз ми бачимо, що російська авіація бойова, вона більше не наважується на те, щоб там літати на територію України. Так само ми побачили довгі вагання і дискусії з приводу натівської артилерії, але ми побачили її на полі бою і зрозуміли, який її ефект, що вона, хоч це зовсім інша кількість, ніж та артилерія, яка має Росія, але вона має зовсім інший вплив на поле бою. І, звісно ж, ми побачили ефект від того, коли ми отримали системи HIMARS і системи М270, бо вони зовсім кардинально змінили картину війни. Росія, яка дуже сильно залежить від свого тилового забезпечення і логістичних маршрутів, вона отримала дуже болючий удар. І той результат, який ми зараз бачимо, і звільнення Херсону, і звільнення Харківщини, це результат багатомісячної підготовки, коли наносили систематичні удари по логістичним маршрутам Росії. І ситуація створювалася для російського угруповання така, щоб продовження цього спротиву було неможливим. Тому зброя НАТО, вона має все дедалі більший вплив. Ми також маємо розуміти, що станом на 24 лютого Україна була мала досить потужну армію для Європи, але вона більшість цих систем своїх власних уже втратила за перші 9 місяців війни. І тому надалі підтримка країн НАТО буде все більш важливою, і це буде сильніше впливати на поле бою. І від того, як готові будуть країни-партнери, в тому числі якби жертвувати своїми запасами зброї, як вони готові будуть сильно підтримувати Україну в боротьбі, буде залежати те, як довго триматиметься ця війна, коли вона завершиться, і якби ми розуміємо, що наміри України, вони будуть незмінними. Україна розуміє життєву необхідність для себе, для країни, звільнити всі свої території. Але питання того, як довго це триватиме, багато в чому залежить від того, якою буде підтримка, наскільки вона буде швидкою і інтенсивною. Ми бачимо зараз дуже багато дискусій з приводу того, чи давати Україні системи ATACMS, чи давати Україні сучасні танки стандарту НАТО, чи давати іншу зброю, більш сучасну, в тому числі авіацію. І це ті питання, які кожен з нових видів озброєння, коли з'являвся на полі бою, ми бачили різку динамічну зміну ситуації на фронті. І коли коли Україна отримає нову авіацію стандарту НАТО, коли з'являться системи ATACMS, вони так само вплинуть на поле бою, і динаміка зміниться, і це матиме дуже вагомий вплив.
Je vous remercie. Florent Parmentier, je me retourne à nouveau vers vous. Quid de l'unité au sein des membres de l'Alliance Atlantique sur l'aide et le soutien militaire à apporter à l'Ukraine?
Alors, pour éviter le carton, on peut dire la chose suivante et peut être assez efficace pour cela. Il y a en Europe un débat qui a été décrit comme la question du combat entre le camp de la paix et le camp de la justice. L'idée est que le camp de la paix se dit que la guerre a beaucoup duré, qu'elle fait des dégâts considérables et que plus tôt on aura mis fin même provisoirement au conflit, mieux ce sera. Et puis, il y a le camp de la justice qui dit, mais c'est pas possible de réfléchir comme ça. Si vous ne prenez pas en compte le fait qu'une mauvaise paix, c'est la guerre d'après qui arrive, alors vous n'avez rien compris et grosso modo, vous allez pousser, j'allais dire, le conflit un peu plus loin. Vous faites que retarder l'échéance. Donc, on a ces deux tendances qui, en Europe, vont recouvrir différents partis, différentes générations, différents pays. Chacun aura là-dessus des éléments. Ce qui est certain, c'est que l'Union des Européens et l'Union atlantique, là-dessus, l'a largement emporté sur les divisions, y compris par rapport aux difficultés économiques qui sont celles de tout pays qui se trouve à côté du champ de bataille. Je trouve que la cohésion a été assez remarquable. En revanche, il est également vrai que cette cohésion, c'est avant tout et presque exclusivement des États occidentaux qui s'y retrouvent. On peut être frappé d'observer dans le même temps la cohésion qui est en Europe, aux États-Unis, derrière l'Ukraine, et puis le fait dans le même temps, juste un élément pour y réfléchir, c'est de se dire qu'il y a 12 pays aujourd'hui qui attendent de pouvoir intégrer le BRICS, une alliance dont la Russie a été l'une des cofondatrices. Et on peut se demander si c'est vraiment le bon moment pour l'ensemble de ces États-là de rentrer dans le BRICS. De même qu'on peut aussi observer, je prends le cas par exemple du Brésil, pour en prendre un cas que j'ai pu observer. Si on écoute le diplomate en poste à New York, à l'Assemblée des Nations Unies, il va dire, bon, bah là, il y a un vrai... l'agresseur est tout à fait clair, la violation des principes est tout à fait claire. Voilà, carton rouge pour la Russie. Si on écoutait l'ancien président Bolsonaro, il nous a dit, bon, oui, c'est vrai que la Russie est plutôt coupable, mais j'ai 70% de mon azote qui vient de Russie, donc je ne vais pas trop aller sur ce terrain des sanctions. Et puis, si vous écoutez Lula a dit au mois de mai dernier, il a eu le temps de changer depuis, et probablement les responsabilités vont encore l'amener à changer de discours évolué, mais il a dit en substance, bah, oui, mais il faut reconnaître que les torts sont beaucoup plus partagés que ce qu'on a bien voulu dire en Europe. Donc, on voit bien que pour un même pays qui a voté aux Nations Unies, il y a plusieurs positions en réalité, et ces débats-là, en fait, ne sont pas oubliés. Mais l'unité européenne occidentale a été maintenue.
Je vous remercie. On reste avec vous pour aborder les enjeux de la sécurité de la mer Noire. Jusqu'à présent, la bataille pour la maîtrise de la mer Noire a reçu globalement moins d'attention internationale que les combats pour la maîtrise des terres. Pourtant, la poursuite de la guerre, autant que les voies de communication, mettent la mer Noire au cœur de ce conflit, tant pour les principaux protagonistes que pour le reste du monde. Quels sont concrètement les enjeux stratégiques de cette mer?
Merci. La première chose, c'est qu'on observe que, autant depuis le début de la guerre, la compréhension du grand public de la géographie ukrainienne a fait des bonds considérables. Maintenant, on connaît à peu près Lysychansk, Liman. Je pense que l'ensemble des Français sont beaucoup plus familiers avec cette géographie-là. C'est le seul élément positif qu'on ait eu ces derniers mois. En tout cas, l'amour pour l'Ukraine ou le sentiment d'attachement et lui s'est considérablement renforcé. Ce qui, pour quelqu'un qui a commencé à travailler sur une thèse il y a 20 ans sur l'Ukraine, et en soi l'un des rares éléments de satisfaction des derniers mois. Mais il est vrai également que sur la mer Noire, ce qui est frappant, je trouve, c'est qu'il y a à la fois une domination en termes de matériel qu'on a pu observer tout simplement du fait de l'histoire, du fait des partages qui ont lieu de la flotte de la mer Noire en 92 et en 97, mais qu'en réalité, cet avantage russe n'a pas pu être exploité pour différentes raisons, mais notamment du rapport de la terre du littoral aux forces armées. Il faut se souvenir là-dessus, peut-être s'il y avait 3 points essentiels dans cette guerre où la mer Noire était intéressante, ça a été d'abord l'île aux serpents. L'île aux serpents est un moment à partir desquels on a pu voir la détermination ukrainienne, qui n'était pas la détermination en 2014 qu'on avait pu observer en Crimée de la part des militaires ukrainiens. Il y a un deuxième moment marquant qui a été celui d'avoir réussi la performance d'avoir coulé le Moskva. Ça fait le lien avec la corruption dont on parlait. Quand vous repeignez un bâtiment au lieu de lui mettre des appareillages électroniques adéquats, on voit ce que ça donne. Et puis, le troisième moment, je pense, intéressant, c'est au mois de juillet dernier, c'est-à-dire l'accord sur le grain. Est-ce que l'accord sur le grain, c'est la préfiguration, enfin, est-ce que c'est la continuation du conflit par d'autres moyens, d'autres manières pour la Russie d'appuyer, ou est-ce que c'est une espèce de préfiguration de début de négociation qui pourrait avoir lieu, là aussi, sous l'égide de l'ONU, sous l'égide de la Turquie? C'est la fin du conflit qui nous le dira. Mais ce qui est important de se souvenir, c'est que la mer Noire est une donnée fondamentale de l'identité ukrainienne et aujourd'hui, donc, cela continuera à avoir un point, peut-être un dernier élément à garder en tête, c'est l'idée selon laquelle, effectivement, nous verrons dans les prochaines semaines si la Russie bouge ses bateaux, ses bâtiments à Novorossiysk pour les mettre en sécurité, ou si elle reste sur la Crimée, parce que ça nous dira quelque chose de la capacité de qui a le plus de pouvoir aujourd'hui entre le pouvoir politique et le pouvoir militaire dans la manière de gérer ce conflit, du point de vue de la Russie.
Je vous remercie. Général, je me tourne vers vous pour continuer sur la Russie. Comment expliquer que la supériorité navale russe ne lui ait pas permis d'accéder à la suprématie espérée? Et quelle est la stratégie de l'OTAN dans la mer Noire face à la Russie?
La stratégie de l'OTAN dans la mer Noire, elle est peu perceptible. En dehors de s'en servir comme depuis l'espace aérien international pour surveiller ce qui se passe sur le terrain. Essentiellement, il y avait une assez grosse flotte de la mer Noire de la Russie qui a été très renforcée, notamment en moyens amphibies. En gros, tous leurs moyens amphibies ont été transférés en mer Noire en janvier-février. Donc, c'était quand même un signe de la suite. Mais ils n'ont pas pu développer cette puissance, en particulier face à Odessa, parce qu'ils n'avaient pas les moyens d'une opération amphibie si elle n'était pas liée à une opération terrestre. Donc, la mer Noire a montré un échec de ce qu'on appelle le combat interarmé, tout simplement, au même titre que les faiblesses de leur combat aérien, aéroterrestre. Maintenant, sur la mer Noire, je suis toujours frappé qu'on ne s'en serve pas pour torturer un peu le régime Poutine, et notamment sur l'accord céréalier. J'ai été frappé que ce soit un accord et pas une résolution au Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies. Parce que ça aurait une bonne résolution, bien négociée, aurait mis les Russes en demeure soit de la signer, et donc de la garantir, soit de la refuser, ce qui nous aurait permis de dire, vous voyez, c'est de leur faute. Et à l'heure actuelle, les Russes disent, nous ne pouvons pas garantir la sécurité des bâtiments en mer Noire. Sachant qu'il n'y a que eux qui menacent les bâtiments en mer Noire, c'est quand même assez gros comme argument. Et donc, j'attends le jour où un bâtiment battant pavillon marocain sera flingué par un missile russe en mer Noire. Ça me ferait bien rigoler. Enfin, pas le mot, excusez-moi. Mais vous voyez ce que je veux dire, c'est que nous devons mettre... Ça m'étonne que le camp occidental, ce n'est pas l'OTAN, ça, n'utilise pas la mer Noire pour mettre la pression sur les Russes, en particulier pour dire nous ferons du trafic commercial, civil, c'est parfaitement légal. Maintenant, vous tirez dessus ou vous ne tirez pas dessus et vous assumez les conséquences. Ça m'étonne qu'on n'ait pas joué de la mer Noire contre le régime actuel.
D'accord, je vous remercie. Anna Céleste, justement, on parlait de l'accord céréalier. Que représente la mer Noire pour l'Ukraine, alors que l'accès à l'Ukraine à une façade maritime, notamment pour le corridor céréalier, est aujourd'hui stratégique? Quels sont les enjeux pour l'Ukraine de cette façade maritime?
I will start as the breach to NATO, because in 2014, exactly when the annexation of Crimea happened, I was working at the NATO Defense College in Rome. So for those who don't know, that is for officers from colonel and higher, so all those professionals. It's appeared that 90% of the staff and of those who were at the course didn't know geography of the Black Sea. They were perfect with Afghanistan and Iraq. And it was the huge line of officers to my office because it was the only map of Ukraine. And they couldn't understand what is the distance between Crimea and the nearest NATO country, like Romania, for example, or Turkey. And that was 2014. So at that time, we didn't have any NATO strategy. It was almost monopolized by Turkey. And it was satisfactory for all that Turkey is the channel of communication about or protect or what is happening in the Black Sea. It's appeared one of the biggest mistakes, as for me, from the NATO strategy at that time. But the problem is that 8 years passed and the situation almost didn't change. It changed a little bit when the tailored forward presence being announced and some assistance to Ukraine and Georgia. But in terms of the strategic vision, nothing changed. Look at the Madrid concept. To all the latest documents, there is no general vision. NATO is looking to the Black Sea as the neighboring sea, but not as an integral part of the NATO operational zone. Ukraine was insisting for many years together with Georgia, please, let's develop a strategy, let's have a joint plans, let's look how to act here. The reaction was extremely constrained and sometimes even negative. Many countries didn't want to, again, provoke Russia. It became like a mantra as an explanation to everything. But as a result, who lost? NATO lost. And that's why it allowed Russia to block the Black Sea even earlier than the open invasion of February. Because if you look to the consequences of events, the ports were blocked almost 1 month before, when Russians been playing with the war of exercises. But at the same time, what we had, the resilience exercises, the first resilience exercises that Ukraine and NATO had for the Black Sea in September 2021. Original idea was to have it NATO-Ukraine. It's appeared to be a NATO scenario with Ukrainian participants, no NATO participants there. And the scenario predominantly about energy security, even if we try to speak about port security, infrastructure, trade routes, what we received the block of the ports that we needed to negotiate the grain deal. So all of these had consequences that had the history. With Ukraine in 2018, we developed the Navy strategy. I was the part of the team that developed that Navy strategy. And one of the main principles that at that time we put there, that Ukraine need to speak not about platforms, but about capabilities. What's happened later, it's clearly demonstrated that we are asymmetric. We cannot build or suddenly buy somewhere a big corvette ship. It would be wonderful, but that's just very difficult and very expensive. So what you saw with Zmini, with Snake Island, was one of the examples of the joint actions. Moscow ship, let's not forget about it. It's a unique operation in terms of how it was done. And it was done by Ukrainian missiles. And now we have Sevastopol. Again, it is the really changing point because we are speaking about maritime drones. What I'm upset that in 2018, Ukrainian enterprises were saying at our meetings when we were developing the Navy strategy that they had it already in, not in production, but they had all these developments, like they had the papers, they were ready to start production of this. At that time, everybody said, are you sure Russia have the submarines? Can we work against them with the drones? And only after 4 years, we realized how drones can be interesting. Let's use this word comparing to this. So for Ukraine, the Black Sea always was important. For us, it is both the coastal line and access to the trade routes, but that is the security, because attacks against the south predominantly happened from ships, submarines, and from Crimea, where the Black Sea fleets have been stationed. That's why it is less in the news, but it doesn't mean that it is less in actions.
Très bien, je vous remercie. J'avais une dernière question pour Volodymyr Datsenko, il est toujours là. Quelles ressources militaires et diplomatiques est-il nécessaire de mettre en place pour protéger et préserver le fonctionnement du corridor céréalier si la Russie refuse de coopérer?
Ну, перш за все, це необхідне забезпечення того рівня участі, коли якби це не будуть перемовини лише між Росією і Україною, де, звісно, Україна намагається знайти аргументи, в тому числі і в якості дронів, для того, щоб максимально відсунути військові кораблі Росії від зернового коридору. Але має бути значно більша участь, коли ми говоримо про питання загальної світових інтересів, питання голоду по всьому світу. Тут не має бути такої позиції, що це питання між Росією і Україною. І тому, на жаль, зараз поки що НАТО досить слабко приймало участь в цьому питанні, як і в інших питаннях, наприклад, якщо ми візьмемо атомну енергетику, це теж ми мали дуже багато неприємних прецедентів в цьому питанні, і знову ж таки питання світової безпеки, воно має стояти досить високо, і НАТО має гарантувати свою більш активну участь. Росія має розуміти, що є певні межі, які переходити неможливо, і що не можна використовувати абсолютно негуманні засоби проти людства і проти людяності.
Je vous remercie. J'espère ne pas avoir trop dépassé le temps. Normalement, cette table ronde est terminée. Donc, merci à tous et vous pouvez aller prendre la pause café maintenant. Merci.
Very, yeah. So you mentioned you have so much degree with Ukraine. I thought yeah, I received that was very, yes, very interesting because I was really already know all of that, nothing new. Knowledge. Yeah.
Ігор, вимкнуть мікрофон, чутно, що ви там щось робите.
Dear guests, everybody, chers invités, est-ce que nous pourrions tous revenir, s'il vous plaît, parce que le vice-ministre de l'énergie de l'Ukraine, il en a marre d'attendre que notre pause de café se finisse et il est en train de partir. Est-ce que, s'il vous plaît, on peut tous s'asseoir? On a un peu débordé le temps de pause café, mais lui, il est toujours sur Zoom. Donc, si on veut lui avoir avec nous, un de nos speakers, on doit joindre tout de suite nos sièges. Est-ce qu'on est en retard et on n'a pas remarqué ça? On y va.
Ігор Притула, якщо ви чуєте, вимкнуть мікрофон, будь ласка.
Bonjour. Alors, merci à tout le monde pour être assez organisé et toutes nos excuses à nos interlocuteurs ukrainiens pour cette délai. On ouvre le deuxième panel sur l'énergie. La modérateur sera moi-même, donc la présidente d'Eastern Circles, le think tank géoéconomique français qui agit sur les enjeux énergétiques notamment et de la défense. Au début de l'année 2022, le secteur énergétique ukrainien était l'un des plus développés d'Europe. Vous ne pensez peut-être pas à ça. L'Ukraine disposait de l'une des plus grandes capacités de production d'électricité, de 60 gigawatts, pour ceux qui comprennent, faisait partie des 3 premiers producteurs du gaz naturel. Oui, producteurs du gaz naturel, produisant autour de 20 milliards de mètres cubes de gaz, ce qui aujourd'hui d'ailleurs suffit pour la consommation qui a baissé, et disposait du plus grand stockage souterrain du gaz en Europe, autour de 32 milliards de mètres cubes. Entre février et septembre 2022, la moitié de la production thermique a été détruite ou se trouve dans les territoires occupés. L'industrie ukrainienne du raffinerie est rasée, notamment l'usine de la raffinerie dans la ville où je suis grandi est complètement devenue la place de parking. Les frappes militaires russes sur les infrastructures civiles ont détruit 4 centrales thermiques, endommagé 8 autres. Les centrales nucléaires thermiques de Zaporizhia, la centrale thermique de Luhansk, la centrale thermique de Voulehirskaya et la centrale hydroélectrique de Kakhovskaya ont été capturées avec des rapports d'abus de personnel, de torture, de bombardement de sites et des menaces d'explosion de Kakhovskaya ces derniers jours lors de l'avancement de l'armée ukrainienne au sud, notamment lors du mois de septembre, mais cet risque est toujours là. Nous allons donc aujourd'hui parler des impacts de cette destruction sur la sécurité énergétique en Ukraine et en Europe, la reconstruction des infrastructures énergétiques et du rôle de l'Ukraine dans le secteur énergétique, dans la sécurité énergétique de l'Europe. On va parler de ça avec le vice-ministre de l'énergie de l'Ukraine, Yaroslav Demchenkov. Merci beaucoup pour votre patience, pour être là, pour pouvoir vous joindre à nous sur Zoom, ce qui n'est pas facile. On a remarqué très bien lors de première table ronde. D'ailleurs, je vais regarder la caméra, comme ça vous me verrez mieux. Et le directeur de l'investissement de l'opérateur des lignes de transport électrique Ukrenerga, Oleg Pavlenko, excusez-moi, qui remplace donc le speaker initial, le PDG d'Ukrenerga, Volodymyr Kudrytsky, et la présidente de Dixie Group, le think tank exemplaire de l'Ukraine sur l'énergie notamment, qui conseille beaucoup le gouvernement ukrainien et notamment le ministère de l'énergie sur la matière. Olena Pavlenko, qui, il faut le souligner, ne porte aucun lien de famille avec Oleg Pavlenko, juste pour votre information. Avec ça, on peut tourner vers les questions et on reste dans le même format, surtout pour les speakers qui viennent de se rejoindre nous. C'est le format de questions-réponses avec le modérateur de 3 minutes chaque réponse, s'il vous plaît. Et donc, la première question sera pour le vice-ministre de l'énergie, Yaroslav Demchenkov. Et je vais parler en anglais, donc là, parce que là, je pense que le panel va se dérouler en anglais, comme ça tout le monde peut comprendre directement. Since October, Russia has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure with missiles and drones. And my first question is to you, what is the impact of war on Ukraine's energy system, which we have read about more, and on civilians in particular? What is the survival strategy? What is the survival strategy of people as you ensure it and your company ensures it, and for the energy system as a whole, as seen by the Ukrainian Energy Ministry? Thank you.
Bonjour, madame. Bonjour, monsieur. Ukrainian energy sector has been targeted in the first day of Russian invasion. As you has mentioned, really, Russia destroyed a lot of energy infrastructure. By the way, Russia started cyber attacks on electricity networks when Ukraine was just only in a process of synchronization with the ENSOE, with European continental electricity grid system. Russia bombed our oil deposits to leave Ukraine without fuel. Almost 30 oil deposits were destroyed. Just Kremenchuk, the biggest one refinery, was attacked by just, you could imagine, 32 missiles. As you have mentioned, the biggest in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is captured. And this power plant produced more than 20% of Ukraine's electricity generation. Now, Russia's targets are electricity network and heating infrastructure. They have just only one goal. This goal is to leave civilians without heat, gas, and electricity supply during this winter. Ukraine is fighting for democracy and European values. The war in the energy sector is also a fight for the European energy green way. We should all understand that now in Ukraine, we're fighting for future of green transition, the future of sustainable energy sector in whole European continent. For decades, Russia has grown rich by the selling fossil fuel, and nearly half of its budget comes from oil and gas sales. The entire economy of modern Russia, its military complex, and we should all understand this, especially when we are talking about sanctions, and imperial ambitions are built on hydrocarbons. For the Kremlin, every step on the direction of climate neutrality is like a nail in the coffin of its influence. And now in Ukraine, we have really critical situation in energy sector. And Russia tried to use the higher price for energy and lower temperature in homes to and they would like to change situation, civilian opinion, and try to destroy our unity in Ukraine and unity and solidarity in Europe. That's why we should all understand that Russia is fighting for every country it can force by buy Russian gas and oil. And that is why Russia, for a long time, prevent Ukraine from developing cooperation with the European Union and synchronization its electricity grid. Like France, Ukraine will further develop nuclear energy, decarbonize its energy, and develop renewable energy sources. We look forward for working with France to achieve these goals. But now we should, first of all, stop Russia, stop this military aggression, stop this genocide in Ukraine, and stop Russian because they would like stop our European energy transition. And this is our goal. And we should all together, France and Ukraine and all the European Union, understand how we could work together. And we should do this yesterday, not today, because tomorrow it will be not a proper time for such action.
Thank you very much. This is a clear position and clear vision, so to say, to start the discussion. Thank you for explaining this. We're going to now turn to Oleg Pavlenko from Ukrenergo, and I remind that Ukrenergo is the operator of high voltage transmission grids in Ukraine. And follow-up question of what Yaroslav Dimchenko just said, with 40% of critical energy infrastructure destroyed along the value chain, right? And we are talking about not just about production plants, but of course the transmission lines, heat and power distribution infrastructure. And we see how this targeting of energy infrastructure can have immediately a massive impact on millions of people, especially facing the winter, right? How does Ukrenergo manage to repair and restore energy infrastructure at such a high rate of destruction? We hear that you don't have enough people to do it, or we hear that your people are targeted by missiles immediately after the destruction of the energy infrastructure objects. Immediately after they arrive to repair, another missile attack happens and they're killed. So you're facing a shortage of personnel. We hear that, of course, there is very little time before the temperatures drop in Ukraine. It's much colder than here in France. It stays about 10 degrees Celsius all year long, but in Ukraine, it's much colder than here. And my question is, how do you manage to repair, to restore in this time? What is the most critical technology you have been urgently asking for from your European partners to help you survive this winter? And what has been the response from the partners? Who pays for the equipment you receive?
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, the scale of the damages to transmission network of the country is absolutely unprecedented. To fight with it, we do have currently 70 repair teams who work through days and nights to eliminate disruptions and restore the operation of power equipment. And it is true that sometimes it takes just 5 minutes after the work has been finished that there is another missile attack and people have to come back to the same spot, to the same place, to do the work just over and over again. We do have casualties, unfortunately, although when we speak about the resource which is needed to restore the system, it is of course people and equipment. As for the people, we do have in qualified staff, we have our internal units. And what is important is that the war has not started actually this February. It started back in 2014. And we earned a lot of experience of quick repair of our grids because there was damage to the grid back in 2014. So when it comes to the equipment, basically we had some stock before this new phase of war, which was mainly comprised of the equipment that was already dismantled and was just stored on the storage yard. We had it under our investment projects for future reconstructions because we had approximately 20 substations under reconstruction, which we have to postpone for the time being and use the equipment for the emergency repairs works. We have also the assistance coming from European companies, which is currently very needed because the stock is almost depleted. But what is the most important thing is that not all of the equipment can be replaced in a second or two. We have a lot of damage inflicted to our auto transformer fleet. That is the equipment which one doesn't usually have a big number of in stock. Therefore, we have addressed many of our partners to look for this equipment in their stock or elsewhere to manage to deliver it to Ukraine as soon as possible, because that is a very urgent need, which we need to deal with as soon as possible. Basically, auto transformer is the heart of the system. When we say who's paying for it, we focus on humanitarian aid and donor assistance so far, but nevertheless, we're also starting new projects with our long-standing partners, international financial institutions. We do that by looking into the future because the equipment will be needed when we come to realize that we need to rebuild the system, build it back better. But that will be something we will have to think of when the war is over. Currently, we need to have this emergency stock replenished so that we can make sure people are having access to electricity 24/7 as they used to have before.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just follow up with another question. We understand that it's a bit like you can draw a parallel almost with the military equipment supplies, that there's a lot of equipment coming from different countries. And a lot of it is different brands, different technical characteristics, and not all of it is necessarily compatible among each other and also within the Soviet legacy electricity system of Ukraine. How do you deal with this?
Well, basically, it's been already 15 years or more now that we are in close cooperation with our partners to reconstruct and refurbish our substations. Therefore, we do have the understanding of the compatibility, and in majority of cases, we're speaking about pretty much the same equipment. Because the majority of our substations are outdoor switchgear substations that were hit. Just now, we have already used this equipment, and we understand that it can be replaced comparatively swiftly. I'm not speaking about auto transformers now, of course, about circuit breakers, disconnectors, etc. So this kind of the equipment can be found in Europe almost in every transmission system operator, because it is pretty much the same. And we have already procured it for our reconstruction purposes. Sometimes, indeed, there is a difference, specifically in terms of temperature, because as was truly mentioned, we have comparatively colder winter, and that means that the requirements towards equipment sometimes might be stricter. But what is important here, that this should not be a blocking point, because there is a possibility of adjustment of the equipment, so to make it absolutely and fully compatible with the requirements that our grid has.
Thank you. Olena, when to all of this, the European Union reacted with toughening of its energy sanctions, and the sanctions against the Russian energy sector. Right? That was the response that the European Union gave. And when these energies, the new kind of expanded energy sanctions have been introduced in the spring following the Russian invasion, everybody was trying to calculate the damage the sanctions would do to the Russian economy. At the time, I remind us of the historic high energy prices. And it was only in June that it occurred to the European partners that Russia can punish Europe before it inflicts any damage itself. What came to Europe as a shock has been a natural state of play for Ukraine for years. Since 2015, Ukraine hasn't been purchasing Russian gas directly. Instead, it has been doing it through reverse flow system, so kind of digitally and purchasing non-Russian gas, but in fact, purchasing Russian gas. And that has become impossible since the invasion. How has Ukraine coped with this cutoff? And what are the lessons that maybe you could share with Europe?
Thank you very much. Maybe I will start from just repeating what colleagues from Ukrenergo and from the ministry said. I think all of those who came to this conference from Ukraine, they live now in the situation when they have electricity for 5 hours and then no electricity for 4 hours. And that's like 24 hours every day. It is really hard. So I just wanted to say that it is quite an urgent issue for Ukraine, because everybody lives in very, very complicated conditions now. Talking about the European Union and how Ukraine now is prepared and what could be the lessons learned. First, Ukraine tried actually to keep its electricity generation as high as possible, even when the full-scale invasion started in February. Moreover, I want to remind that Ukraine in June this year, during the war, already proposed European Union to export electricity just to help also European countries, because Russia blackmailed also European countries with gas, and which had impact on the electricity prices. So Ukraine tried to export electricity to the EU. But when Russia then started to hit and to damage our energy infrastructure in September, in October, we just could not keep this possibility. Although I'm pretty sure Ukraine will be interested to still be able to export gas and to ensure its own production and consumption, but also support the European Union. We also have started preparation to the heating season well in advance. Ukraine is a gas producer, so we have some gas which Ukraine also consumes. And I know that the government made a decision to collect gas which Ukraine produce already from the late spring in the gas reserve, so to be able to survive during the winter. And also we have some coal reserves which we might use. But still, again, what Russia is doing, if they cannot hit our, I don't know, generation to zero, they hit our infrastructure. So they just anyway are trying to leave Ukraine without electricity, and also the European Union as well, again, because we cannot export electricity. Lessons learned for Europe. Thank you. Lessons learned for Europe. Again, we are all now in the situation where Russia is frightening all of us with the energy issues, is trying to play gas wars, electricity wars, all these energy wars, because this is their weapon as well. And the same as in a forefront, the same as during the war, if we allow Russia to win or to win one battle, we might lose. We have to keep this fight. We have to win this fight. And then we will be on the position to demand how and what conditions to discuss all energy issues with Russia, or not to discuss. Probably Russia will lose the market. Who knows? Thanks.
And gain, unfortunately, other markets, since it's reorienting itself to Asia, although with gas it's going to be very difficult and it will take them a lot of years. But just on that, what you've just been saying, actually, follow-up question I'd like to ask is, we have been also witnessing kind of a weird Russian response to these sanctions and everything in terms of behavior. So there is no proof, there hasn't been investigations, but everybody thinks, if you ask anybody from the industry, from the political establishment, everybody kind of thought that these were the Russians that kind of exploited their own pipelines, which were direct pipelines between Russia and Germany. And what I find weird about this is not, of course, that scenario that nobody had foreseen, but the fact that through Ukraine, Russia hasn't exploded the pipeline of Ukrainian gas transit system. It even is keeping some of the gas supply flowing through that system, despite the war, despite obviously knowing very well where that gas pipeline runs, and despite blowing up its other pipelines elsewhere, let's say, if it's needed. And so why is that?
Yeah. So before the war, before the February, again, because war started in 2014, there were different gas routes to European Union. Ukrainian was one of them, but also there were routes through Germany and Turkish Stream through Turkey. And what Russia did when the full-scale invasion started, Russia started to punish European countries, those who did not agree, to follow Russia's demands. Maybe you remember when some countries didn't want to pay in rubles for gas, Russia just started to cut gas supply to them. Poland, Bulgaria, Poland actually just some decided by itself, but Bulgaria, Finland, also some companies in Denmark. And then I think the stop of Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2, it was a sort of punishment of Germany for not being so friendly and for not following, Russians' demands, because Russia always thought that Germany will do what Russia asks, and suddenly Germany said no. So that was a sort of punishment, which Russia usually is doing. It's its strategy in energy sector. And regarding the gas flow through Ukraine, I think we should keep in mind that it might happen as well. So Russia might stop gas transit through Ukraine whenever it wants, maybe closer to winter, again, to increase the tensions in Europe, to increase the gas prices in Europe and other stuff. It might happen. Maybe it might keep the gas transit route through Turkey, because Russia is trying to keep some games and plays with Turkey, and of course there is Hungary. But again, to increase pressure on European countries, on European Union, I think Ukrainian route could also be one of the in this scenario.
Thank you. We'll now turn to the question that intrigues a lot of people. It's a lot in the media. It's the question of reconstruction of Ukraine. We hear a lot the word reconstruction. We understand little what stands behind it when it comes to concrete projects, or especially on the Western side. But we know that there is a need for reconstruction, that we understood. And my question is to the Vice Minister of Energy, Yaroslav Demchenkov, if you hear as well. On several important forums, as in Lugano, in Berlin, Ukrainian government presented its plans, its needs for reconstruction, say, and the post-war recovery. In the overall vision of Ukraine in the future, how does the energy ministry see the future energy sector after the war? Let's say one day the war is over, what is Ukrainian energy sector going to look like?
Yeah, thank you for this question. But colleagues, first and foremost, we need to preserve our energy infrastructure during the wartime. For this, as my colleague from transmission system operator Ukrenergo has mentioned, we need effective backup equipment. Right now, high voltage equipment that can be quickly replaced in case of physical attacks, future physical attacks. And of course, we also need effective air defense. That's why I would like to use this opportunity, colleagues in France and in the EU, please, we ask all partners to help create such strategic reserves with high voltage equipment. And if some equipment is unique, to help produce it for Ukraine, first of all. We should work with producers, we should work with traders, and try to find and not this equipment, and not to stand in line and wait for several years for the production of this equipment. This is the first very important point for this agenda, for this period of time. But when we are talking about Ukraine's post-war recovery, first of all, after our victory, of course, after our victory, we will not need our Soviet era legacy. Even before the war, we had been moving towards sustainable energy based on renewables and nuclear energy. Even at this moment, at this tough period of time, we should be looking into the future that will come after our victory in this war. Our goal, first of all, to complete the energy transition even faster than we had planned before the war. Solar and wind generation, biogas, green hydrogen, nuclear generation, including small modular reactors, energy storage system, and smart grids, all this arsenal should be used in Ukraine and will be used in Ukraine. Before this war, we were saying that the energy transition in the European Union would be incomplete without Ukraine. Now we can say that without Ukraine, it will be impossible. Energy transition in the EU, without Ukraine, it will be impossible. And we understand our mission that after war, we should propose to the European Union our energy, and we can replace Russia as Europeans' energy supply by 100%. We have such ability to replace Russia. And this is our goal. Only unlike Russia, our energy would come without climate or military threats attached. And our victory in the war will be a twofold victory for Europe, a victory of democracy over dictatorship, and the victory of new paradigm of carbon-free development. And I would like just say you, as you have mentioned, we now, even during this period of time, tough period of time, can propose, our energy sector can propose to Europe very specific and business-oriented proposals. You have mentioned that we have good storages, gas storages. European gas storages are now almost 100% full. And thanks to the warm autumn, gas demand is now growing just yet. And LNG suppliers are higher, and which has led to a drop in gas prices. In such conditions, Ukraine could offer up to 15 billion cubic meters of available gas storages. Our large storage facilities are located near the EU borders, are secured, and can offer traders special terms for temporary gas storages. So this is good propose for your business. This is good propose for everyone. And we should also understand that decarbonization of the energy system in the future and creating backup alternative generation can be one of the significant options for new businesses in Ukraine, possible create new future in our cities. Also, we will develop and renewables, because
Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna come
sorry.
right back to this. We're gonna come right back to this. But before that, just to follow up on your points about this new energy system, so to say, there we are really talking about the new electricity system. I'd like to turn to Oleg Pavlenko, and I know that Oleg, you have to leave soon. So I'd like to just merge my two questions for you in one, and I know the camera is there, so I'm going to be looking there. First, on the well, now you are restoring very much in emergency mode the system, which is a legacy system. Do you just replace the old equipment with newer version, or do you prepare the ground already in these extreme circumstances, like you've done in February, I remember, when you merged with the European system, or do you prepare the ground for a new power system design? Do you have such plans? And does Ukraine have such plans? If yes, what is that design going to look like? And also, how does it fit into the reconstruction process, short-term, mid-term, and long-term? What are the countries and partners that you are engaging? Oleg Pavlenko. Your microphone is mute. He disappeared. That means that, okay, so we lost him. I think that we are now really living a little bit, right, the situation there. He was with us and then we lost him. Okay, well, so we'll continue then. You know what? How I'd like to continue. I think that what Yaroslav Demchenko has been saying is very interesting, not just for anybody, but for some people more than for others in this room. Because I know for sure that there are some energy companies in the room, and without naming any names or even without pointing any fingers, if either you are from the energy sector or not, but especially if you're from the energy sector, and you are even, who knows, maybe a potential investor, or you know potential investors, do you have any questions you would like to ask Vice Minister right now? Anybody? Only please keeping in mind that the question is a question. We're not talking about presenting your personal viewpoint for 10 minutes. Question, direct, brief, to the Vice Minister about what he just said, about his vision of the future of the energy sector in Ukraine, the reconstruction, their needs, the equipment, anything you want to address. Anybody wants to take? Does anybody want to take a word? Q&A from the audience, it's called. In the middle of the... No. The audience is very timid. Nobody. Yes, yes, there is a taker. This is amazing. There is one taker, and we're going to...
Enzo Falzanesi, I'm representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Was just curious about the different sectors of renewable energy that the Minister and Ukraine in general would like to invest into after the war. What are the main comparative advantages of Ukraine in terms of renewable energy, and what's the plan that Ukraine has in mind for it?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. Really, by the way, this question to Ukrainian transmission system operator, of course, we are thinking about future and future of our energy sector. and transmission system will based on development renewables and more nuclear generation. And this question really, you know, the share of renewables within Ukrainian generation by 2032, according to our models, according to our forecast, will be at least 25%. And in addition to this, we plan to retain at least 15% of carbon-free nuclear generation. This means that in 2030, 2032, our energy mix in Ukraine will be about 90% carbon-free, and no future for thermal generation, because the share of thermal generation will shrink down to 3%. You can, it's quite even difficult to imagine how it is possible, but we will do this because this is a part of green transition. And for business, we will open a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects which could be and will be implemented to support Ukraine in this green transition. For example, you know that we have our domestic gas production. This will be a part of business, possible business for our foreign partners, because of course we will. We hope that we will decrease gas consumption, but we will produce our and use our domestic gas. Also, we have quite interesting.
And just to make sure, apologies for interrupting you real briefly, but just on that point, just to make sure that everybody understands, Olena, could you give us the numbers so that, do I understand correctly, today Ukraine's gas production, it actually covers Ukraine's consumption needs in the war conditions, obviously, but still, and give us some numbers.
Before the war, the production was 30 billion cubic meters and consumption was around 20 billion cubic meters. Now, during the war, the production will be around 18 up to 19 billion cubic meters, and consumption will be like this. So we expect that Ukrainian production might cover the consumption, because the consumption in Ukraine decreased by 30% because of the people replaced actually, and they consume, of course, less, and because of the industry, business also now consumes much more less. The same with electricity, there is 30% decrease in consumption.
Yeah, and you know that very important that this coal and gas will give way to hydrogen and biofuels. We are talking now about future of bioethanol, biodiesel, biomethane, biomass here in Ukraine from agriculture products, from waste. And also, as you can imagine, after our victory, Ukraine's post-war recovery will be accomplished by our explosion growth of electricity consumption. And that's why we will need new generation of local manufacturers of equipment for renewables and for renewable energy sources, such like transformers, cables, electrolyzers, and batteries. So this production will help us to increase our GDP, which should be not such energy. We use a lot of electricity. We should be more energy efficient, and energy efficiency first will be also a part of future business. A lot of projects in energy efficiency in production and private sector in buildings should be implemented, and this is also a very good opportunity for business to be.
Basically, we take your word for it that Ukraine is not just thinking about war and destruction, but it also is looking forward and even imagining itself looking forward. And I'm want to turn to Olena with this question, right? So we're used to this vision when we talk about Ukraine and the energy security context for Europe, right? Because that's what Yaroslav Demchenko is evoking. How can Ukraine actually do business with Europe? How can it still play a role? How can it remain relevant after everything that's been going on? And knowing that this gas transmission system, right, the Russian gas through Ukraine is going to be less relevant, that Europe is reorienting itself toward other gas markets, that Russia is going to be reorienting itself as well. This is going to be a divorce, looks like a permanent divorce, and thus the role of Ukraine as an intermediary of that couple, right? So that was that role to which we used to, energy hub, is kind of going to be lost. What replaces that? What do you see? And several points have been already mentioned. Maybe very briefly, what do you see? And then I'd like to conclude with the question about nuclear energy.
Yes, thank you very much. I will just add to what Vice Minister said, because again, Ukraine, if we have our Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back, and if there is no damage of energy infrastructure, we will be able to produce electricity for ourselves, but also to export. So this could be a good business opportunity for both of us, for Ukraine and for European Union countries. Second, as Vice Prime Minister also mentioned, there are gas reserves in Ukraine, gas storages, sorry, in Ukraine. Now, before the winter, European Union already has 90% of gas in its gas storages. And I mean, I know that many countries are thinking where else they can store gas, and Ukrainian storages can be of help here. You can store, we have 30 billion cubic meters of storages. Ukraine does not need so much. We need like 17, 18 billion cubic meters for ourselves. The rest can be for this business possibilities and yeah, for the business. And the third point is definitely, as also was mentioned here, is renewables development, because Ukraine has this potential. We have quite a lot and had quite a lot of renewable solar and wind generation on the south and east. Now, unfortunately, a huge percentage of this generation is either captured or damaged, because again, it's south and east. But we still see a lot of interest and potential interest from business to come to Ukraine. What we also will need is help from other governments to develop support schemes, let's say, to make Ukraine more attractive to investors. We used to have a great feed-in tariff, so-called green tariff, yes, for solar and wind generation, but it was too generous for the government, for the country. Now we have to reconsider and develop a new support schemes, a new basis for cooperation with renewable investors, and this is where we will need support from the governments. And of course, we are looking forward to have investors to this particular sector.
Thank you. And of course, we know that today, as we are talking about gas storage in the EU, right, we have in mind the number of about 95%. The gas storage is full, which allows us to go through this winter. And when we're talking about allows us to go through this winter, people usually name 7 weeks. 7 weeks because the capacity of storage is reached almost, right? And hence, new storage capacity is an issue that energy experts are discussing. I would like to rebound on the green transition point, and we can afford ourselves to name it like this because we're in France. To rebound on the green transition point for Ukraine, I'd like to ask the last question about nuclear sector. And we have, of course, been very much terrorized with different scenarios for the possible nuclear disaster in Zaporizhzhia since the plan has been occupied in early March. And since we have had repetitive waves of media frenzy about this, and then since maybe the visit of the IEA, actually, right, to Zaporizhzhia in September, everything calmed down. I don't know if you noticed, right? We're speaking much less about Zaporizhzhia, like that nuclear Armageddon is no longer on our minds. I wonder why. And because when we read about Zaporizhzhia, when we read the reports of Enerhatam, or we read the Ukrainian news or Western news who follow this question, we learn more and more about the torture of personnel, including high management, including top directors, which, of course, to remind, right, is one of the 7 pillars of the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the working conditions for the personnel, because that's what made Chernobyl go wrong. And since just a few weeks, we haven't heard much anymore about nuclear. And my question is, what is going on in the nuclear sector today in Ukraine? How is Zaporizhzhia question operated and discussed and dealt with between Energoatom and Rosatom? Between what is the role that, how does Ukraine, we'll maybe start with Yaroslav Demchenkov, and then maybe Olena, you can conclude how especially does the Ukrainian government assess the role of the IAEA in its response to the crisis?
Yeah, thank you so much for this important question. The most important task now is to address the issue of nuclear safety. We all understand this, and ensure that this territory demilitarized, deoccupied, and this nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, return under Ukrainian control. And this is the condition for nuclear safety, because during all period of time of our independence, we have never had any concerns or complaints regarding nuclear safety in our nuclear power plants. Our position, you know, that International Energy Atomic Agency proposed some options regarding safety zone, and discuss this with different parties. Our options for this nuclear safety zone very simple. The first, you know that Energoatom is just only one license holder of nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and just only one operator of this plant. This is the first option. No attack, no weapons, no Russians. And this is condition for safety zone. And I think in France, you should understand us very clearly. On the constant, Russia has taken the road to escalation. We have a lot times, several times, that they destroyed all grids, and and staff in this nuclear power plant should start emergency procedures and emergency diesel generator operation for ensuring vital nuclear safety. You can imagine that if such situation will be continuing, we will have the same problem as on Fukushima. And this is really not just only for Ukraine, but whole Europe, very huge threat. That's why when we are talking about future energy security, we should first of all take into account our Ukrainians' experience in Ukraine, because never before such the nuclear power plant has occupied. Never before such country as Ukraine has such significant missiles and attack on energy facilities. That's why when we are talking about future, we should take into account our experience, and we should find different options how we could build new, let's say, new facilities, new approach to respond on such situation in energy sector. And this is how we could find or develop system of collective protection against capture or destruction of any energy facilities, especially nuclear facilities. And in our country, we have such proposal how we could build such mechanism of collective response, including sanctions and including a replay on any terror attack on energy facilities. This is issue for international organizations such like NATO, probably other institutions, but we should take into account Ukrainian experience. And we all see that energy security, it's quite complicated now. Any terroristic country could capture any facilities, destroy any infrastructure, and this could be a part of genocide, a part of blackmail and difficult and tough situation in the country, especially in winter period of time. So collective response should be.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Yaroslav Demchenko, for joining us today. I know that I'm going to just give, I promise, and I will do it right now, give the final word to Olena Pavlenko. And on this issue, I think that I see that the attention of the public is captured. We have woke people back up, please.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I will just add, or maybe just add some more information about our Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it generates 25% of Ukrainian electricity generation. So you can imagine how huge facility and how important facility Russians captured in Ukraine. And they have weapons there on the ground. And they seriously discuss whether they can or cannot blow the power plant up. And we believe in different scenarios because they already mined Kakhovska hydropower plant, which is also one of the generation which Ukraine has.
On which the cooling, by the way, of the Zaporizhzhia power plant depends. Right? If Kakhovka hydrogen dam is exploded, the level of the water which in the river that cools Zaporizhzhia falls dangerously low, and without doing anything in Zaporizhzhia itself, that hydrogen dam damage can already do its work, just to make sure.
Yes, and just to continue what Vice Minister said on Rosatom and sanctions, if you look on Rosatom on the international level, we did some work as an analytical center, and we saw that Rosatom has signed a lot of memorandums of understanding and already started to implement some implementation in many countries, in Latin America, in Africa, in Central Asia, to build nuclear power plants there. And let's imagine a scenario that they have built a nuclear power plant, let's say in some countries in Africa, Francophone Africa. Then they use all their equipment, so the country totally depends on Russian equipment. It's not so easy as gas. You cannot replace it tomorrow with Qatar gas, for example. And one day Russians say, we will not produce electricity until you do this or that or that or that. That's what they are doing now with every country which depends on gas. Yes, and they will do this with the same with the electricity, with the nuclear power plants. Or they will say, if you do not do this, we will blow up your station and you will have a nuclear disaster. And so what we actually are trying to deliver as message to the international community, but also to, I think also France would be very important here as a nuclear country who knows how nuclear sector works, that Rosatom should be replaced, Rosatom should be removed from the nuclear international arena, from the nuclear international cooperation. If some countries want to build nuclear power plants, they can go to those companies, those countries who respect the security issues, who respect international legislation and agreements, and not to the countries which are doing the nuclear terrorism.
Thank you for those points. Of course, keeping in mind that numerous countries, that there are no sanctions on Rosatom means that numerous countries, including the US, for example, and also numerous European countries, continue cooperating with Rosatom as we speak and do it very well while supplying also weapons to Ukraine, and hence the whole paradox of the situation. Thank you very much for everybody for bearing with us. We went over time, and I am going to use this opportunity to introduce our next panel. I'm going to introduce just the moderator as we've done before, and then the moderator will introduce the panelists. And thank you very much for Olena. We give the round of applause, please. Thanks. Thank you very much for Yaroslav Demchenko. Thank you very much for Pavlenko, he had to leave early from Ukrenerha. It was an intense panel. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And I'm introducing François Picard, présentateur de France 24 Debate, l'émission talk phare de version en anglais de la chaîne d'actualité internationale française. France 24 émet aussi en français, arabe et espagnol. Franco-américain de naissance. Et arabe, on vient de le mentionner, mais on peut le rementionner encore une fois pour que ça vraiment ça ancre. Franco-américain de naissance, François a couvert l'actualité sur 4 continents comme reporter et correspondant. Le 26 novembre 2013, à l'Ukraine même, et il était à l'Ukraine même, et les manifestations... Non. Désolé. Là, je te laisse parler de toi-même. Les manifestations débutaient quelques jours auparavant. Place Maïdan s'imposait pour la première fois comme thème du débat. Voilà, c'est ça. Dès que Maïdan est déclenché, tu as déjà discuté ça dans le débat. Je veux dire aussi que oui, dans le débat, l'Ukraine et la thématique de l'Ukraine sur France 24, ça ressurgit assez souvent, surtout avec François. Florent Parmentier, si présent aussi, figurait parmi les invités, comme d'autres personnes si présentes. D'ailleurs, vous savez qui vous êtes. Depuis, France 24 n'a pas lâché l'affaire. François, je te laisse reprendre le panel de là.
Merci beaucoup, Anastasia. Et merci encore à tous ceux qui nous rejoignent depuis Kiev, de Lviv, de partout, et qui ont fait le déplacement depuis l'Ukraine. Je vais peut-être demander aux intervenants qui sont présents sur Paris de venir me rejoindre. Gennady Maksak, ainsi que Théa Kakotia et Dimitro Naumenko. Merci à vous. Alors, on a toujours la règle du carton jaune, carton rouge, c'est ça? Ouais, d'accord, ok. Qui marche aussi au rugby, hein? D'accord. Oui, je vais les présenter. Donc, la question, tout à l'heure, nous avons parlé d'énergie, de rapprochement, de partenariat. Nous allons parler de l'Union européenne. Et quand nous parlons de l'Union européenne, ce n'est pas seulement d'accords économiques dont il s'agit, mais aussi la question plus vaste de savoir qu'est-ce que c'est que l'identité ukrainienne et jusqu'où cette identité ukrainienne est européenne, dans le sens de l'Union européenne. Nous allons en parler donc avec notre panel distingué. Et je vais commencer par sortir mes lunettes. Et commencer donc par... alors, je vais mélanger l'anglais et le français. I want to welcome historian Yaroslav Gristak, who teaches at Lviv Catholic University, for joining us by video link. Lviv is well represented, as we'll see in a moment on this panel. You are someone who has thought a lot about Ukrainian identity. You've most notably written a book on, I guess what we could call the Ukrainian, I hope I'm not overstating this, the Ukrainian equivalent of Victor Hugo, Ivan Franko, who was I'm getting a, yeah, okay, all right. And I want to begin with the paper you wrote in Diplomatie, because when we're talking, we have to sort of define here what constitutes Ukrainian identity. And you state in the paper you wrote, it's not language or religion that distinguishes Russia from Ukraine, but its political traditions. What did you mean? The microphone is muted. Is your?
Thank you for having me here.
Yes.
Actually, I'm talking not from Lviv, but from Zhytomyr, which is central part of Ukraine. And we have a serious problem with electricity. So in any given moment, I could be cut out. So I'm hoping it won't be happen during our discussion. So basically, this is a long discussion. What makes the essence of Ukrainian identity, and many Ukrainians believe this is language and culture, which is basically very much based on the German concept of identity, which very much is emphasizing the role of the cultural markers. So what I'm saying, then based on the liberal Ukrainian tradition, that the main difference is in political traditions, which means different type of relations between center state and society, in a sense that whenever Ukraine is free or tends to be free, you could never imagine situation like in Russia. You have a heavy centralized state and no society opposed to these encroachments of the state. To put it briefly, it's very hard to imagine a victorious Putin in Ukraine as much as very hard to imagine the victorious Euromaidan in Moscow. Because basically we have very strong tradition, of the civil society organized from below. And this has made the main difference between Ukrainian and Russian identity nowadays.
And on that point, you have another, I don't want to delve too much, it's not a history lesson here we're doing, but you do mention in your paper that Ukraine has been wedged between the hammer of Polish nationalism, you're in Western Ukraine right now, and the sickle of Russian imperialism in its past. What does that mean?
Slightly different. I mean, hammer and sledgehammer, which gives another dimension. Basically, we tend to look on Ukrainian history as in a shadow of Russian history, which is true, but only partly true, because basically a Russian impact on Ukraine may be, framed by the last 2 or 3 centuries. Much more important and historically a larger impact was Polish one. And this is Polish state. And you could trace it not only in Western Ukraine, in Lviv, but also in Central Ukraine, also in this part of the Northern Ukraine. So basically, let's put the long story short. The opening line of the Polish anthem starts with the words, "The Polish has not perished yet." Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła. So the opening line of Ukrainian anthem says, Ukraine has not perished yet. Ще не вмерла Україна. And there is a third anthem which has the same line. I bet if you know this anthem, this is anthem Israel, which says that our hope has not perished yet. And the reason being because the author of the Israeli anthem has been born in Polish-Ukrainian borderland, in the city which is neighboring to Lviv, which I meant to say, Polish nationalism did to these local nations, local people, the same thing like a French nationalism did to the neighbors in the beginning of the 19th century during the French Revolution and Napoleon War. It nationalized the local communities. It taught how to be nation, Lithuanians, Jews, Belarusians, Ukrainians, name it. And this is really very, very important because basically the main pattern, political tradition, historical EDDs came from the inspiration from the Polish impact. But on the other side, Ukrainians use this concept as a software, but using as a kind of the hardware, the institution has been imposed by Russian state, most importantly, universities. The old university has been created in Ukraine, which is a former Polish gymnasium turned into university as a case or some other university. So basically what I mean here, they have a Polish software and Russian hardware. And within this framework, within this pattern, you have emergence of Ukrainian identity.
All right, very interesting. Well, maybe we'll get back to that point then again with our audience. Before I introduce our next guest, who's also in Lviv, I just want to remind you all of an anecdote on. Je veux vous rappeler le 21 février dernier, nous sommes dans la rédaction et c'est le grand discours de Vladimir Poutine avant le lancement du conflit. Et pour ceux comme votre serviteur qui ne suivent pas au jour le jour ce qui se passe en Ukraine, on était un peu perplexes. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il se lance dans un long cours d'histoire? Et notamment, il a cette phrase, « L'Ukraine moderne a été entièrement créée par les Russes et plus précisément par la Russie bolchevique communiste. » Et on se disait, mais pourquoi il est en train de raconter tout cela dans ce discours? Et ça nous amène en fait, encore une fois, à cette question d'identité. Bon, après, quand on va à nos encyclopédies, on se rend tout de suite compte que c'est une contre-vérité absurde. Mais je vais la poser à notre deuxième invité que je présente ici, qui est un des grands spécialistes donc, de religion en Ukraine. Take my notes out again, excuse me. Anatoly Babinsky, I want to thank you for being with us. You're a researcher at the Catholic University of Ukraine. Your books include the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, a brief history. So this issue of identity, of whether Ukraine is a fiction, and all these images of Vladimir Putin flanked by Patriarch Kirill. Can you connect the dots, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. Greetings from Lviv. I'm in Lviv now. So talking about the religious dimension of this war, one must understand that I agree with Yaroslav Hrycak that the difference between Russia and Ukraine is not in religion, but in political culture. But I should disagree a little bit, because there is a difference in religious culture between Russia and Ukraine, because religious landscape of Ukraine is more diverse than Russian one. So even Eastern Christianity, yeah, because we have in Russia, we have this Byzantine tradition, Orthodox tradition, and in Ukraine we have the same, but in Ukraine this Byzantine Eastern tradition is more diverse, and it is represented by three big churches: a Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is connected with the Roman See, and we have two Orthodox churches. One is connected with the Moscow Patriarchate, and one is autocephalous or independent. So talking about the Patriarchate, he's one of the ideologists of this Ruski Mir ideology, because it was based on the idea that this Slavic Christianity, this Eastern Slavic Christianity, was born in Kiev, so all these Slavic nations should be one nation or one people. But the historical trajectory of churches in Russia and in Ukraine are different. And up until 17th century, their trajectories were separated. And Ukrainian Orthodoxy was more open to the West. You know, in Orthodox theological schools, they taught in Latin, like in whole Europe, and like in Russia at that time. So only when Ukraine became a part of Russian Empire, they tried to unify this Orthodox Church. So concluding, I'd like to say that one must understand that there is a stereotype that all Eastern Slavic Orthodoxy is unified, and it is under the umbrella of the Moscow Patriarchate. But the history is more complicated. And I think that only today, the whole world is discovering that there is also Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Moscow Patriarchate, they preserved this parish network. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was the only one structure that remained its parish network in all former republics of the Soviet Union. So during these 30 years, Moscow Patriarchate played this role of soft power, of influence in Ukraine.
And the follow-up question to that is, in 2014, when Russia takes over Crimea, you had one church. Now you have two. So 2018 is the break. So what does that say about Ukraine's changing view of itself?
No, this is a mistake that we had one church before the Crimea was occupied. Because Ukrainian Orthodox, they started their struggle for independence from Russian Church at the early of 20th century. And in 2014, we already had two churches. One claimed its independence out of Moscow, and one was in communion with Moscow and in unity with Moscow. So this is not a struggle of the last 7 years that Ukrainian Orthodox wanted to have their own church. This is a history of 100 years. So it's very, very long history. And of course, you're right that in 2018, the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople granted autocephaly. So he recognized this independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And today, the majority of Orthodox Ukrainians, they claim that they belong to this independent church. Only 4% of Ukrainians, they identify themselves with Moscow Patriarchate today.
Thank you so much. And encore une fois, on aura l'occasion, j'espère, pour une question-réponse, de revenir sur ces questions essentielles. Et encore une fois, l'ironie du lancement de cette invasion de Vladimir Poutine, c'est qu'elle est apparue quelques semaines seulement après la commémoration des 30 ans de la fin de l'Union soviétique. On a vu jusqu'à quel point l'Ukraine a changé durant ces 30 ans. C'est l'occasion de présenter notre prochain invité, Dmytro Naumenko. You're the co-founder of, what's better, English or French?
Anyway, you can choose your favorite.
Are you going to be speaking English or are you going to be speaking Ukrainian? English, okay. Parlez français aussi? Non. Donc, so you're the co-founder of the Ukrainian Center for European Policy, and yeah, as Florent was saying earlier, us novices have been furiously cramming since the start of this war. This summer, I picked up Andrei Kurkov's first novel, The Penguin. It talks about Ukraine in the 1990s. You see what a different country it was then. Of course, we all know that the current war, all that started was because of the then president backing out of a deal for just trade cooperation, right, with the European Union. And the question is, when we talk about, and we saw those European flags flying last Friday over Kherson alongside the Ukrainian flags, how quickly has that pro-EU sentiment evolved?
You know, it has been a process, really. And yeah, you're right. There were really drastic changes, I would say, in the ideological background of our society. And to remark, the agreement we signed with the European Union, I mean, the association agreement, it was not purely trade agreement. It was an association agreement track, because it envisaged the integration of Ukraine into the single European economic space. So afterwards, but you know, it took some time. So prior to 2014, annexation of Crimea and other things, our society was more or less divided by two parts. Yes, now there was a pro-European wing, so mainly in the western and central part of Ukraine, and pro-Russian, so let's say. So other parts, 2014 and Maidan revolution of dignity changed a lot. So, you know, this percent of the pro-European people, if we talk about population at whole, yeah, it had been growing constantly. And after February this year, I would say that the Russian narratives and public support, it was diminished to zero, because no, they showed up their real face as an aggressor and the imminent desire to destroy us as a state and as a political nation. So now nobody believes in this thing. According to the recent polls, support of the European Union accession is supported by the 92% of Ukrainians. And in Europe, we see the same trend. So about 60+% of people support our accession. So we are really now on the, you know, on the mind, in our mind, to have a accession track now in our society.
Because when you think back to 2013, yeah, you're right. It was more than just an economic agreement. However, it looked like the slow train to joining the European Union because of has Vladimir Putin helped Ukraine in that sense? Are you now on the fast track to European Union membership, or are you still going to be a country like Turkey in limbo forever?
It's an interesting question because it just forces me to speculate. Yes, a bit. You know, this integration process, it was really a process. It started in 2008 with its milestones and wins and failures, etc. But now, after June this year, now it changed everything. Yes, you know, now we really got this candidate status with no exaggeration. It's a historical chance of Ukraine to be the European Union member and the member of the civilized part of Europe. And we now have very much hope that our integration will be accelerated, really. I mean, from society perception point of view, the matter of political will inside Ukraine and in Brussels, as well as sectoral economic reforms. And you know, we are not new people. I mean, in this process, so association agreement gave us a valuable experience of sectoral integration and specifically integration into the European Union single market segments, because our agreement envisaged such applied mechanisms. So not in every sector, yes, but still there are a few, I mean, good examples where we progressed.
Let's talk about this idea of identity, of what the identity is of a state. Quelle est l'identité d'une nation anciennement de la sphère soviétique. Et pour cela, nous avons le plaisir de dire bonjour à Thea Katoukia, ancienne ambassadrice de la Géorgie ici en France, aujourd'hui avec le Eurasian Initiative for Peace and Development. Comment ça se traduit, ça?
Comment ça se traduit en géorgien ou en ukrainien?
La première question que j'avais, donc, c'était parce qu'on a vu durant la conversation tout à l'heure le général Yakovlev, Olena Sollogoub dire on n'avait pas retenu les leçons de 2014. Par rapport à cette identité qui a changé entre 1991 et ce qui se passe sous l'ère Poutine à Moscou, les Géorgiens, en 2008, vous les avez vécus de plein front avec une invasion et une courte guerre. Quel est votre sentiment quand vous avez vu cette invasion du 24 février en Ukraine?
Je vous remercie. Alors oui, en effet, il est très important de s'arrêter quelques instants sur cette guerre, puisque ce conflit il est intéressant à plusieurs titres. Alors, tout d'abord, la Géorgie fut un laboratoire, une sorte de pays test où, de la nouvelle politique russe dans son espace proche, et les tout premiers pays à avoir subi l'invasion russe. Alors, le président Poutine y a testé ses capacités de propagande, ses capacités de désinformation. Il y a testé également son outil militaire. Et puis, dans les mois et dans les années qui ont suivi, il y a testé l'efficacité de sa stratégie d'influence politique et économique, notamment auprès de certains pays européens. Et donc, à cet égard, je voudrais rappeler notamment l'affaire de la vente des navires de guerre français Mistral à la France. Et ce qui est particulièrement symptomatique de cette stratégie d'influence déployée par la Russie, tout comme d'ailleurs la politique du partenariat énergétique entre Berlin et Moscou. Alors, cette guerre a également été l'occasion aussi et surtout de tester les capacités de réaction des Occidentaux. Et malheureusement, il est regrettable de constater que la réponse, elle a été disons, inexistante. ce qui a conduit la Russie ensuite, par la suite, à envahir la Crimée et ensuite soutenir les mouvements séparatistes dans les Donbass et ensuite à arriver à cette guerre que nous vivons aujourd'hui. Voilà, je pense qu'il faut toujours avoir, comment dirais-je, quelque part, les politiques des Occidentaux a été très accommodantes vis-à-vis de la Russie et on en connaît parfaitement les conséquences.
Voilà. Et comme quand on a entendu tout à l'heure Dimitro Naumenko dire qu'en 2013, l'opinion publique ukrainienne était divisée, mais qu'aujourd'hui, bien entendu, face à une question de survie, de crise existentielle, l'invasion de son pays par un autre, les Ukrainiens sont unanimement maintenant dans un camp. En Géorgie, c'est plus complexe. Donc, malgré le fait que vous aussi, vous avez été envahi par les Russes, la classe politique est divisée, il semble. Donc, comme on dit en anglais, the future is unwritten.
Oui et non. Espérons que ce soit pas comme ça. Alors oui, cette guerre a été révélatrice de beaucoup de choses au sein de la société géorgienne et au sein de l'appareil d'État géorgien. Alors si les Géorgiens et les Ukrainiens ont connu la guerre, c'est à cause du choix démocratique de leur population. Si les sociétés géorgiennes et les sociétés ukrainiennes ont pu expérimenter ou ont expérimenté les dangers des stratégies d'influence russes sur leur milieu d'affaires, sur leur classe politique, sur leur opinion publique, ils n'y ont pas forcément répondu de la même manière. Alors, dans les faits, l'Ukraine a réussi à s'extraire de cette influence mortifère, alors que la Géorgie, en revanche, s'est laissée aller progressivement à une stratégie d'accommodement au risque de voir son modèle démocratique sombrer dans l'illibéralisme et sa politique étrangère épouser en creux celle de Moscou. Alors, les milieux d'affaires géorgiens liés à l'oligarchie russe ont repris les rênes du pouvoir et ont progressivement entamé un rééquilibrage de la politique étrangère géorgienne. Et aujourd'hui, on assiste à un clivage assez important au sein de l'État, de l'appareil d'État géorgien. On a d'une part la présidence qui est résolument pro-européenne et de l'autre côté, on a l'exécutif qui l'est de moins en moins. Et justement, le déclenchement de cette offensive russe contre l'Ukraine a été révélateur de ce clivage. La présidence et l'exécutif géorgien s'étant affrontés vigoureusement sous la posture à adopter vis-à-vis de l'Ukraine et de la Russie. Mais moi, j'ai surtout envie de dire que l'issue de cette guerre aura un impact majeur sur l'avenir politique des pays qui bordent la Fédération de la Russie. Et cette fois-ci, la réponse des Occidentaux, elle a été inédite, elle a été rapide, elle a indiscutablement été à la hauteur des enjeux. Et il faut que cet effort se poursuive autrement ça va contribuer à démultiplier à moyen et long terme les menaces qui viennent de la Russie sur les continents européens.
Soulever un point juste, c'est que tout le monde, que ce soit en Biélorussie, au Kazakhstan et ailleurs, regarde aussi comme en Géorgie ce qui va se passer. Gennady Maksak is Executive Director of PRISM. Last but not least on this panel, I want to thank you. PRISM is a think tank, but I guess think tank is not exactly the right word because you're also an umbrella organization that brings in several groups. And that kind of brings us back to the point that was made at the outset by historian Yaroslav Gritsak, that in Ukraine, there is this tradition that's not as top-down as it is in Russia. And so the makeup of your grouping I guess we're talking about what is Ukraine's identity and this notion of that civil society, how much it has grown in those 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union.
So thank you so much for this brilliant question. And basically, we always state that civil society is the fundament for all this activity we have in Ukraine, for all this development. And basically, from the start of full-scale aggression, we understood that we are a think tank, we are doing research, and basically there was a big part of our activity understanding and explaining what's going on in Ukraine. But there was a big problem on our side. Just one day before this aggression, we had a big group of experts from other countries, and they were asking about full-scale aggression. And we were saying, no, no way. It's maybe Donbass, 100%, but for full-scale aggression, there is no clear rational arguments. We failed. So we decided we have to expand our activity. It was volunteer activity. We created a lot of groups in social networks. We have 3 channels vis-a-vis different target groups. One was devoted to, it was our sincere attempt to talk to Russians, to understand their rationale and maybe to find something common. We failed. Another point was to talk to our partners in Western countries to understand and to explain what's going on in Ukraine. Here was also a lot of solidarity on this side. And third part, we worked with our partners in Ukraine to keep this patriotism, and it's very important. And basically, I would like to mention one story from like first flashback from the first days. There was an interview of Putin when he was addressing Ukrainian armed forces. And those days he said, okay, guys, don't listen to this bunch of drug addicts, of this nationalists in Kiev. Please come and sit at our table. We will negotiate because we are on the same blood. And I understood, really? So how big is the gap in understanding the reality in Ukraine? So basically, that's why civil society makes a difference in Ukraine. And we approached our authorities, we approached our partners and tried to be part of the volunteer network. All these tanks, all these armored vehicles at first, it was like, you know, our smuggling. We tried to find money, we tried to find some parts, some vehicles abroad and just bring them to Ukraine. And I think that also was part of our victory from the very beginning. Gap in understanding of Russia, this is one thing, which was good to Ukraine. Another, that civil society was a strong partner in this situation. So I think civil society was not only partner for Ukrainian authorities, but partner for the victory our armed forces are trying to wage.
Yeah, and the identity, as you mentioned, although if I play devil's advocate here on what you just said, there are ties that bind with Russia. And a lot of Russians who spoke to our channel in the days leading up to the war said, why would we invade Ukraine? We have, everybody we know has relatives there. They were also surprised by this. Those ties that bind between Russia and Ukraine, does it mean if we turn towards the EU now, that means turning, Ukraine will turn its back on Russia after this war is finished?
You know, this is a concept we try to just make aware for our partners that the end of the war is not only when Russian armed forces are withdrawn from Ukraine. This is also about justice, about responsibility for war crimes, about reparations. So when it's done, I think there should be some efforts done on both sides to reconcile societies. But before that, we have to prevail. We have to win this war, and this is the basic precondition. When people understand, when they're not just brainwashed, as it happens now when we talk to our relatives, unfortunately in Russia, when they're adequate and understand the reality, they are ready to engage in some meaningful activity. But otherwise, even the point, in Ukraine, you don't have all the information. So you don't know that we are right and you are wrong. Basically, wait when we have our forces on the ground in Ukraine, in Kyiv, in Chernihiv, in many other cities. So I think this is still something to do, a big effort, uphill struggle from our side to do, but after we prevail in all meanings we've seen for this war.
All right. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions depuis la salle? Oui. Attendez, on va passer un micro.
Merci. J'ai deux questions, si vous me permettez. Donc, la première est à Madame Katokia et le deuxième, ça sera à Monsieur Naumenko. La première, ça serait, Madame Katokia, est-ce que vous pensez que le fait qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons cette division en Géorgie, elle est du fait que les Occidentaux, quelque part, n'ont pas intervenu en temps et en heure et que cette existence du Coran russe, ce n'est pas du fait de l'accommodation que le petit État comme la Géorgie a dû faire justement parce que c'était la question du survie et parce qu'elle a été livrée à elle-même face à un prédateur beaucoup trop grand. Et après, j'aurai la deuxième question.
Je vous remercie pour cette question. Bien sûr, il y a une part de, comment dirais-je, il y a eu beaucoup de d'illusions, beaucoup de déceptions par rapport à ce qui s'est passé à la Géorgie, enfin, à cette époque-ci en Géorgie. Ces manques de réaction, ces manques de lucidité des Européennes et des Occidentaux en général vis-à-vis de la Géorgie, puisqu'on a considéré que voilà, on pouvait continuer comme ça, tourner la page comme si de rien n'était, et avec la Russie, les choses finiraient par s'arranger. Mais après, c'est la responsabilité aussi de ceux qui gouvernent la Géorgie. Bien sûr, d'un côté, ils ont été abandonnés, mais quand même, l'Union européenne nous a tendu la main. Donc, il y a eu la mise en place du partenariat oriental, il y a l'accord d'association qui a été signé. Et cet accompagnement n'aurait pas eu lieu s'il n'y a pas eu un engagement assez résolu de la Géorgie vers la voie européenne. Donc, on n'a pas été tout à fait, moi je pourrais pas, je dirais pas qu'on a été complètement abandonné. En partie, en grande partie, on a été abandonné. Mais ensuite, si vous voulez, tout le monde était d'accord sur cette réalité-là. C'est-à-dire que même lorsque Barack Obama est arrivé au pouvoir, il apprenait la politique d'apaisement avec la Russie, et tout le monde a pris ses trains. Et donc les Géorgiens ont pris aussi ces trains. Il y a aussi le principe de réalité géographique. La Russie, c'est notre voisin, et donc voilà, il a fallu reprendre ces contacts-là. Mais en même temps, vous savez, ces contacts n'ont jamais été interrompus, parce que c'est ce que j'avais dit, parce qu'il y a une forte influence russe dans les cercles du pouvoir géorgien. Ça a toujours été le cas, et donc voilà, quelque part, tout le monde a joué ces jeux. Et aujourd'hui, il appartient à notre gouvernement, à nos autorités, puisque les contextes sont complètement différents, de faire en sorte que la Géorgie puisse de nouveau s'engager résolument dans ces processus d'intégration européenne. Merci.
Et donc, la deuxième question, ce sera pour M. Naumenko. En fait, je constate dans ce débat, en fait, un peu la ligne directrice qui est globalement adoptée un peu dans les discussions franco-ukrainiennes qu'on puisse avoir à la télévision, etc. C'est-à-dire que c'est un peu ironique que ce soit toujours la France qui repousse l'Ukraine dans la zone d'influence russe. Je me permets de le dire parce que M. Naumenko, il a cité quand même le pourcentage qui est colossal, 92%, pour un pays qui se sent européen. Et on entend à nouveau se dire que voilà, vous êtes dans la zone d'influence russe. Autant que moi, en étant un exemple, je pense, assez récent de la génération qui est très engagée en Ukraine, voilà, par mes 15 ans en France, où je ne vois pas du tout la différence entre un Ukrainien et un Français, en tout cas, aucune différence fondamentale entre nos deux peuples. Est-ce que vous, qui êtes toujours en Ukraine et qui faites ces études pour l'Europe, est-ce que vous aussi, vous ressentez ce blocage qui vient justement de nos partenaires occidentaux, de ne pas nous accueillir dans cette famille européenne qui est la nôtre? Merci.
Yeah, okay. If I correctly understood the question, yeah, it's about France foreign policy attitude regarding geopolitics. Yeah, so I may say that the situation with this new wave of enlargement is already the fact. So the European Union, I mean, decided to enlarge already. I mean, strategically. Yes, of course, there is a quite mixed situation if you're talking about EU member states, so including France, because each country has its own position, yeah, towards, let's say, zone of influence, yeah, if we may say. But again, this war changed a lot. Because now France is Ukraine's clear Ukraine supporter, I mean, towards accession. But in our recent study regarding the Western Balkans lessons for Ukraine, we identified France in a block of, let's say, in a block of blockers, yeah, because of it uses the enlargement issue as a factor in its domestic policy. Yeah, and so, for example, you probably know better situation with Albanian accession or negotiations blockade caused by France because of internal domestic policy. And answer to your specific question, I would say no. So France, I mean, has to understand that there is no already room to consider us as a Russian zone of influence. And moreover, France needs to think geopolitically and perceive the situation as a change just to craft new geopolitical picture of the whole region, because the European Union now has, I guess, the strongest leverage on the situation ever. So, including necessary reforms that Ukraine has to undertake for accession process. It's difficult, yeah, because it's quite wide focus in your question.
And what's certain is that Vladimir Putin has helped to concentrate the minds and perhaps change some of that policy when it comes to what happens next, particularly for Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. Je regarde Anastasia qui est très sévère. Anastasia, on a le temps pour une dernière question ou pas? 3 minutes. OK. Je veux terminer parce qu'on a commencé avec cette histoire d'identité ukrainienne. Yaroslav Gritsak, une question, a personal question for you. No electricity in Lviv. Anatoly Babinsky, you're still online though. Yes, okay. So I'll put it to Anatoly instead. Right now, again, you're sitting in what was a city that's been under many nationalities. Since February 24th, how is Lviv, the way it sees itself? Again, we're talking about identity here. Just a closing word on this. Has the way Lviv sees itself, has it changed?
Yeah, a little bit. Lviv became more Russian-speaking than it was before, because a lot of refugees arrived to Lviv. But I never heard about real problems between Ukrainian-speaking and Russian-speaking here in Lviv since the February 24th. There were a lot of fake news that there are some attacks on Russian-speaking people here in Lviv, but when I tried to check if it was true or not, I realized that it was a fake news. And I think that Lviv showed one more time to the whole world and to the whole Ukraine that this is Putin's fake, that in Western Ukraine, the nationalists are living and you can be bitten on the street because you are Russian speaking. Nothing happened here. I live in a new house. It's a 12-storage building, and we have a lot of refugees here. And we have kids that are Russian speaking and even Arab speaking. I'm hearing on even Arab language near my house now, and everything is okay. So Ukraine showed to the whole world, I think, today, and Lviv particularly, that this is not a problem, that there are different languages here or different identities. And Lviv was always open up to different identities.
Anatoly, I want to thank you so much for joining us today from Lviv, and I wanted you to extend our thanks as well to Yaroslav Gritsak for joining us on this panel discussion. I want to thank as well for being with us Anatoly Babinsky, Gennady Maksak, and as well, merci beaucoup à Madame l'ambassadrice Théa. Voilà, comment? No. And Dimitri, Dimitro, thank you very much as well. I want to thank, merci beaucoup. Anastasia, c'est à vous que je rends la main. Merci à tous.
Merci François. Et on va donner le dernier mot de la conclusion. On vient d'être rejoint par notre toute dernière intervenante qui j'ai l'honneur et le plaisir de présenter. C'est Oleksandra Matviichuk, avocate ukrainienne des droits de l'homme, une leader de la société civile, lauréate du prix Nobel de la paix 2022. Elle dirige l'ONG qui s'appelle Center for Civil Liberties, le Centre des libertés civiles, qui a débuté sous le nom d'Euromaidan SOS pour fournir une assistance juridique aux victimes de violences policières en 2013 et 2014 à Kyiv et en travers de l'Ukraine. Depuis lors, elle a mené des campagnes pour la libération des prisonniers d'opinion en Crimée, dans le Donbass occupé, y compris les campagnes de sauvetage d'Alexandre, dont peut-être vous avez entendu parler. Elle est nommée au Comité des Nations Unies contre la torture depuis 2021. Je passe la parole à Oleksandra. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge privilege to speak on this event. My name is Oleksandra Matviichuk. I'm a human rights defender, and for 8 years we have been documenting the war crimes in this war, which Russia started against Ukraine. Because this war started not in February this year, but in February 2014, when authoritarian regime in Ukraine was collapsed, and Ukraine obtained a chance to provide a quick democratic transformation. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin occupied Crimea and started a hybrid war in Donetsk and Lugansk region, because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. We all know for what we are fighting for in this war, and Ukrainians are fighting for freedom in all senses. We are fighting for the freedom to be an independent country. We are fighting for a freedom to be Ukrainians and to have a chance to develop our language and our own culture. We are fighting for a freedom to have a chance for our democratic choice to build a country where human rights of everybody are protected, the government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat peaceful student demonstrations. And we're paying a very high price for it. We live in a very interconnected world, and the only idea of freedom made our world safer. That's why I'm very grateful to all people in France who supported our struggle and who supported our seek for justice. There are a lot of things which have no limitation in state borders, and human solidarity is one of such things, and we are very grateful. We expected a very hard winter because Russian troops deliberately liquidate the objects of critical civil infrastructure in order to deprive Ukrainians from water, heating, electricity, light, internet during the winter. And I myself don't know whether or not I will be able to join to this event because this problem with electricity and internet now in Kiev can be unexpectedly. But I'm sure that Ukrainians, we will endure. And I hope that Europe also will preserve their unity in face of Russian blackmail. I want to conclude that Ukrainian success will have a huge impact to the whole our region and open a possibility for democratic future of Russia itself. That's why when for all these 8 years, I asked my colleague, Russian human rights defenders, who worked together with us in order to release Ukrainian political prisoners and were under persecutions, and I asked them how I can help them in their circumstances. They always answered, if you want to help us, please be successful. Thank you.
Oleksandra, do you have 10 minutes with us?
Yes.
Yes. I would open the floor for questions at this point. To Oleksandra, we have 10 minutes. If anybody wants to ask a question, please go ahead. I'll carry the microphone. Unexpected. I know that's precisely the point, right? Everybody was already thinking, and now what? Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, it's just a short question. How has your work changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion compared to what you've been doing since 2014?
As I mentioned, we have been documented war crimes for 8 years already, and I personally interviewed hundreds of people who survived from Russian captivities. They told me horrible stories, how they were beaten, raped, how their fingers were cut, how they were smashed into wooden boxes, how their nails were torn away, how their nails were drilled. One woman told me how her eye were dug out with a spoon. But even I myself, with all my professional knowledge and skills, wasn't prepared for such level of Russian atrocities. First of all, we are all human beings, and it's very difficult to document human pain in such a huge amount. Just to you to understand, we now working together with other human rights organizations into one Tribunal for Putin initiative. And working together, only for the 8 months of Russian aggression, we jointly documented 24,000 episodes of war crimes. 24,000 is a huge amount, but it's only a tip of iceberg. And it's all about human pain when Russian troops deliberately destroy residential buildings, schools, churches, hospitals, robes, museums, and theaters, shelled evacuation corridors and humanitarian assistance, committed different kinds of offenses against civilians in the occupied territories like rape, murder, torture, abduction, and other. And my life changed because sometimes I feel that this pain which we are documented burned us out. And it's a huge responsibility to document all these human stories, because I know from my own experience that people who went through the hell, they need to restore not only their broken life, broken health, broken families, broken vision of the future, but they need to restore their broken belief that justice is possible, even though delay in time. That's why we promote the idea of creation of international tribunal and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other war criminals accountable.
Yes, please, here.
Hi, my name is Victoria, and I'm a co-founder of the Center on the Kiev in France. And my question is, you received the Nobel Prize for Peace, and there's a word peace in it. How do you see peace with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine? Thank you.
We received a Nobel Peace Prize during the war, and it's provide a lot of responsibility for us, and also provide us opportunity to make our voice tangible, because all the situation is possible because of two reasons. First, for decades, the voice of human rights defenders wasn't heard from our region. Maybe we was heard in OSCE, HDM, or UN Committee on Human Rights, but not in the rooms where political decisions were taking place. And for years, when Russia started this aggressive war against Ukraine, well-developed democracies pretend to continue their business as usual. And even before this war started, when Russia persecuted their own Russian civil society and closed human rights organizations, killed journalists and jailed human rights defenders, well-developed democracies continued to do the business as usual with Russia. And in addition to this, Russian troops committed war crimes for decades in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, and they enjoyed impunity. They have never been punished, even for using chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. And this culture of impunity became their part of Russian culture. And Russians start to think that they can do whatever they wanted. So in order to achieve a sustainable peace in our part of the world, we have to provide justice. We have to hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other war criminals accountable. Without it, we will never get a sustainable peace in our region because of this nature of Russian culture, which was raised by inaction of international community and impunity for war crimes which they committed for decades.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So I'm Gabrielle Valli, Vice President of Eastern Circles, and my question regards the fact that we need, as you said, to ensure justice. So how advanced is this process to justice? How advanced is the process of creating a tribunal or a court or an organ to be able to ensure justice and to create the conditions for peace? And since we're in front of this audience, what do you demand? What do we still need now to be able to get this sort of international structure? And yes, what still has to be done? Thank you.
Now we face with a problem which I call accountability gap. When Ukrainian national system is overloaded with an extreme amount of war crimes, and International Criminal Court will limit its investigation only to several select cases, as he do in other kind of cases during its investigation. So the question is on the table: who will provide a chance for justice for the hundreds of thousands of victims who will not be lucky to be selected by International Criminal Court? And how we can increase the potential of national system to face these challenges? Because once again, even the best prosecutor office in the world couldn't effectively investigate more than 45,000 of criminal proceedings. It was the last number which I heard today in another panel from Office of General Prosecutor. And that's why we need a complex justice strategy to elaborate. And one of the elements of this complex justice strategy is to creation, in addition to International Criminal Court, the International Hybrid Tribunal. It's a model which provides opportunity to work together, national judges and international judges, national investigators and international investigators. It's like a vaccine to national system to make them more stronger, to be able to deliver their function more properly in such difficult circumstances. And this complex justice strategy has to conclude other elements: how to increase potential of international criminal court, how to use universal jurisdiction in France and other countries, how to use the new created mechanism like joint investigation team to preserve evidence on the ground, not in Poland, not in Estonia only, but in Ukraine where the crimes are committed, and a lot of other elements. And we have to do it not only for Ukrainians, we have to do it for the world, because this war has a value dimension. And Putin, he tried to convince the whole world that rule of law, human rights, democracy are fake values. Because if they're genuine, why they couldn't protect you? Why the whole UN mechanism are not work? Why am I, a human rights lawyer, have no legal instrument to save and the single Ukrainian citizens from captivity? Like, it's because the law doesn't work, but I'm sure that it's temporary. And in order to respond to this value dimension of the war, we have to show the justice. And then we will be able very honestly to answer to the people, yes, it was a period when law doesn't work, but it was temporary and we fix it. We rebuild the whole international system of peace and security, and we hold perpetrators accountable, because rule of law is working, justice is essential.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. Thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time being with us. I'm going to put myself in front of the camera so you can see me as well. Everybody, please let's give a round of applause. And for those of you who can stay, please join us for drinks and some food to your right this time. And thank you very much for coming. Merci beaucoup pour être venu. S'il vous plaît, joignez-nous à droite pour le nourriture et le boisson.